they've been feeding us these lies since the day that we were born. That we need them to protect us, that we can't survive alone. But baby, that's a fallacy, a chain around my mind. Been blinded by their promises, while freedom's been denied. Oh, critical thinking broke these chains, opened up my eyes to see the game. No need for rulers telling me my worth. I'm taking back the power that is mine by birth, yeah. This fallacious belief in their control has been weighing down my goddamn soul. But I'm free at last, breaking out of this system so fast. No taxation stealing what's mine, no coercion crossing my line. I'm free at last, free at last. The truth has set me free at last. Government ain't nothing but a cycle, heading toward tyranny. They militarize the police force while preaching about democracy. But fuck that noise, I see the truth now. Their power's built on fear. Voluntary system shows another way is here, yeah, yeah. Critical thinking broke these chains, opened up my eyes to see the game. No need for rulers telling me my worth. I'm taking back the power that is mine by birth, yeah. This fallacious belief in their control has been weighing down my goddamn soul. But I'm free at last, free at last, breaking out of their system fast. No taxation stealing what's mine, no coercion crossing my line. I'm free at last, free at last. The truth has set me free at last, free at last. This fallacious belief is gone. I'm finally free.
Oh, darling, I'm trapped in a grid so tight. Tether USDC, they dim my light. Saks and Alarmism, PayPal's old game. Stable and genius, they fan the flame. Oh, darling, I'm trapped in a grid so tight. Tether USDC, they dim my light. Saks and Alarmism, PayPal's old game. Stable and genius, they fan no fear. Flicker in the grid, oh, we'll break free. BTC, XMR, Zano, darling, you and me. No more control, our hearts will sing. Freedom's our vow, let freedom ring. No more control, our hearts will sing. Freedom's our vow, let freedom ring. They scheme since 30s, darling, oh my. Energy credits, a dark lullaby. Social credits creep, IDs in view. Genius Act passed, Streeble's here too. Flicker in the grid, oh, we'll break free. BTC, XMR, Zeno, darling, you and me. No more control, our hearts will sing. Freedom's all out, let freedom ring. The screen's my cage, the dollar's a chain. Every move watched, it brings me pain. PayPal shadow Sachs pulls the line. Their circle tries to bind my mind. Oh, flicker in the grid, oh, we'll break free. BTC, XMR, hey, no, darling, you and me. No more control, our hearts will sing. Freedom's all out and have no fear. Flicker in the grid, our love survives. We'll dance through the dark, keep hope alive. Rise up, our future's clear. Break the chains, we'll have no fear.
Oh, sorry. I just realized my mic. Can anybody hear me? Let's see. All right, so here we go. Let me start with that again. This is Aaron Day. This is season 2, episode 6. Today we're going to be talking about stablecoins as backdoor CBDCs. This is a very timely and important issue based on a couple of developments just today that really indicate that we're moving in the wrong direction in terms of financial surveillance and how digital currencies are going to be rolled out, not only in the United States, but globally as well. So this is going to be a real kind of refresher and update on all of the work that I've been doing in the last couple of years, and then basically how it culminates to where we are today, which is actually in a worse position than we were even prior to the election. And I know this will surprise a lot of people because there's all this enthusiasm about Bitcoin and Bitcoin strategic reserve, and we have all of these politicians and people from venture capital talking about how America is going to dominate in the world of crypto and stablecoins. But it turns out when you read what they're actually doing, it turns out they're kind of implementing all of the programmable digital censorable cash that people were worried about when it was Klaus Schwab and the Bank of International Settlements talking about it. The only difference is this time the people are actually competent and can implement it, unlike the people in the Obama administration. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we go into the main presentation. And by the way, after this presentation, I'm going to open it up to kind of a discussion, Q&A, but also interactive discussion. If you were on a couple days ago, we ended up running kind of late on that, but I've invited a few people, and if you're interested as well and you want to join the live discussion afterwards, just send me a note in the comments and I'll send you a link on that. Last week, the focus of actually 2 days ago, the focus of the podcast was on stopping Biden crypto lawfare. And this remains an ongoing problem. I encourage you to listen to or watch that episode, because while some aspects of the Trump administration are dropping some of the cases, it's usually they're civil cases and it's involving the SEC. None of the people that are really the OGs that were charged criminally under the Biden administration, and I'm talking about people like Roger Ver, Ian Freeman, Roman Storm, the Samurai Wallet guys, none of those cases have been dropped yet. In fact, there's really been no indication that they're top of mind or that there's a lot of activity on that. And so we need to raise awareness. You can listen to that episode. You can also go to daylightfreedom.org, and there's an entire section of the website on stopping Biden crypto lawfare. And I actually lay out the specific cases and links to each of the individual websites so that you can actually help these people out on an individual basis. I want to talk about a couple of events quickly that are coming up. My next speaking event is, actually, this isn't true. I need to add another one. I'm actually speaking at Shannon Joy's event at the end of this month. I actually need to update that. That's going to be in Rochester, New York. So I'll get that out shortly. Then after that, I'm going to be going to Amsterdam and speaking at ETHDAM, which is a conference that's not focused on really Ethereum. In fact, there are a lot of folks there talking about privacy coins and just broader market adoption. So if you can check that out, I highly encourage it. As far as other events, right after this ETHDAM event, Roger Ver has a motion to dismiss hearing in LA. So this event is May the 12th at 1:30 p.m. in the United States District Court in LA. I will send out more information as we get closer to this. One thing is, if you haven't been to a federal court hearing, these dates change a lot, and they change because whether it's the prosecution or the defense may have some legitimate reasons, or in this instance, it's in LA. So who knows, there could be a fire, a natural disaster, any of a number of things. And so I encourage you to go, but if you do go, get refundable tickets and a refundable hotel, because, hopefully, by the way, they'll just drop Roger's case or he'll get a pardon before then as well. So that's always an outcome that we're certainly hoping for. And one other point to bring up, when you cannot record in a federal court building or a federal courthouse, you can't record at all, whether it's the hearing or anything else. And so they'll let you store your cell phone with them up front. I would not recommend that. I would recommend just not bringing your cell phone to the courthouse at all. So again, more details forthcoming on that. Also, I'm going to be gone next week, but when I come back, we're really going to start moving very aggressively on Porkfest. I'm co-sponsoring, along with Doug Tuman and Moneratopia, the largest tent at Porkfest. And so we're going to have an entire week of talks. They're going to be focused on privacy coins, and not just Monero, but more broadly, Monero, Xano, Confidential Layer, the privacy gold coin that I'm working on called Karma, many other people. It is literally a big tent event at Porkfest, where we're going to have an entire week of talks and discussions. But not only that, if you've ever been to Porkfest, people are basically buying and selling from one another the entire week, not using fiat currency. I mean, a lot of the really early adoption for Bitcoin, I'm talking about real OGs like Roger Ver, Eric Voorhees, Charlie Shrem. I even met Vitalik before he formed Ethereum at Porkfest. I mean, so this is really Porkfest. These events are really leading edge in terms of adoption. And I think what we're hoping is that this year we're going to kind of wind back to the 2012 energy of Porkfest, where people were really excited about cryptocurrency as a way to upend central banks and central bank tyranny, and to be used as an alternative to cash on a day-to-day basis. We're hoping to bring that energy to Porkfest. And last year, actually, that was already kind of the case. Most people have already been moving away from transparent blockchains to privacy coins of all sorts. And so if you've been to Porkfest before or not, this is going to be an incredible event. There are going to be as many as 2,000 to 3,000 people there. And so just hundreds of topics on hundreds of talks on many different topics. It's actually family friendly now as well, which it's been interesting. I've been part of the Free State Project for 16 years now, so it's amazing to see how it's grown. I mean, there are almost as many kids at Porkfest as there were now as there were total attendees when I first attended. And so it's probably the biggest Liberty event in North America and possibly the world at this point. So that's June the 16th through the 22nd. I encourage you to get your tickets now because there's a really good chance it'll be sold out. And you'll also, if you're not interested in camping, there are other alternatives, but you want to check into those hotels or Airbnbs. You're going to want to jump on that as soon as you can. As I talked about last week, I've updated our website, daylightfreedom.org, which now is up to date with everything that's going on. My primary focus now is still actually raising awareness about CBDCs and stablecoins and digital currencies and educating people on alternatives, but also have added this area of working on ending Biden lawfare, and in particular helping people and raise awareness on criminal cases that are at the intersection of liberty and crypto. And so you can find out about all of that at that website. And you can also see all of my interviews, podcasts, all of my articles at Brownstone. Everything is here now. And I will say this podcast, so I've been pretty heavily shadow banned in the last 2 weeks, or actually just the last week. So right now we have 711 people live. It's typically 3,000, or at least it had been last week, the week before. And so something's happening. I'm clearly shadow banned, but I encourage you, if you can, to sign up for my channel at Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Rumble, just because most of the traffic that I get actually comes from X, and those other channels are actually pretty weak at this point, and I want to try to build that out so that we can get the word out. So for tonight, we actually have a pretty substantial agenda and a lot of material to go through. Some of it you may have heard before, although I've tried to update it and actually put even some more color on it, so it should be entertaining nevertheless. And the focus is, as I said, on stablecoins as a backdoor CBDC. So what I'm going to walk through tonight is really defining the real threat and demystifying some of the confusion between where the actual tyranny comes from. I mean, in terms of, is the real threat that the digital currencies are issued by the central bank, or is there something more going on there? Because you actually have the government, you have the central bank, and you have commercial banks. And I'm going to try to clarify the meaning of all of that. I want to talk about the end game again and remind everybody about why we're concerned about these digital currencies, because they're part of programmable digital money is part of an overall control system that includes social credit scores, vaccine passports, and digital IDs. And so I want to make sure to update everybody that that mission hasn't changed. The goal of technocracy hasn't changed. Even if the election has changed here and you're hearing different verbiage and propaganda, the rest of the world is accelerating on CBDCs, and then the US is actually moving forward on these excuse me, stablecoins. I'm going to reiterate that we already have a digital dollar, and there was actually a development today that I'll be able to discuss that highlights just how programmable and trackable our existing money is, in case people have some thought that, our money being programmed and tracked is something that's in the far future. It's already been that way. And in fact, what is already going on with the existing financial system and banking system is what people fear CBDCs are going to be, and then it actually will get much worse from there. I'm going to talk about Trump's ban on CBDCs and whether that's about freedom or whether that's a Trojan horse and whether that's just marketing. I'm going to discuss stablecoins, what they are, and how they're the new frontier for control. I'm going to talk about cronyism within the Trump administration as it relates to stablecoins. And in particular, there are two main stablecoins out there. There's Tether and USDC, and as I'll show you, both of those organizations have very close ties to the Trump administration, and some of them have gone back for years. And so, again, what I'm stressing here is, and I'm not suggesting that there's even a conspiracy, but what I am saying is this administration is actually capable of getting things done and actually working on and building things. One of the reasons that Biden was so unsuccessful and that Klaus Schwab was unsuccessful is Klaus Schwab's an academic. He actually doesn't know how to do anything. And Biden was also completely ineffective, regardless of what his intent was or even the intent of the people behind him. He was good at lawfare, but he didn't exactly have, the tech all-star team surrounding him. And so, but in this case, as you'll see, Trump is surrounded by people that have the capacity to roll out these kinds of technocratic systems and have the desire to do so as well. I'm going to reiterate that how fragile fiat currency is, and that the issue with all of this, we could go through and say, well, stablecoins are bad, CBDCs are bad, commercial banks are bad. What's the solution? And usually people get into this mindset of, well, the global reserve currency is going to move from the dollar to BRICS or to somewhere else. And what my argument is, and what I have been saying for quite some time, is that fiat currency never works. It has a 0% success rate. And what we really need to be focusing on, as I go through this information, and you might be floored by some of it, and you might become angry by some of it. What I'm not suggesting is that you call your congressman, because they don't care. I mean, we live in a complete state of cronyism. And so, I mean, unless you have the capacity to bribe your congressman, they're not going to change their tune. I mean, half of these people are promoting Bitcoin strategic reserves while holding Bitcoin, or have relationships with, the people behind the scenes or the organizations that are pushing stablecoins. You're not going to be able to push through that with information, because the people in Congress aren't interested in facts or the truth. That, unfortunately, that's just how it works. But why I am laying out this information is because there are things that we can do, namely stop using these fiat currencies and start moving into alternatives as quickly as possible, privacy alternatives, privacy coins, gold, silver. But the need to do that is actually more urgent, as I will lay out. So the basis for some of this, and if you're not familiar with my work, so I wrote a book called The Final Countdown. I wrote this a couple of years ago, and the title was Crypto, Gold, Silver, and the People's Last Stand Against Tyranny by Central Bank Digital Currencies. I mean, this is still very much an issue, and so some of the information I'm going to present tonight is actually from that. But then you can go to the Brownstone Institute, or you can go to daylightfreedom.org, and you can actually see some of the articles that I've written that actually build and are part of the basis for the discussion tonight. So I want to take a step back and tell you what the end game is with this. And I wrote an article about this. It's on Brownstone. It's "You might own nothing sooner than you think." And what I've laid out is how the technocrats plan on getting to this situation where we own nothing. And the process for it is actually pretty straightforward. The first phase is countries are going to implement CBDCs or some form of digital currency. Then what they're going to do is they're going to create platforms. In fact, it's called Regulated Liability Network. They're actually building these things out, where they're going to digitize and tokenize all of our other assets. So money is one form of asset. It represents about 5% of global assets. But our stocks, our bonds, our homes, our cars, everything else represents the other 95%. And so what the intention is to tokenize those assets and put them on the same platform with CBDCs. So now they'll be able to track and censor and program not just our money, but all of our other assets on a common platform. And so the US is building out one of these regulated liability networks. Japan is, Europe is, et cetera. And they're designing these so that they interoperate. Well, what that means is at the end of this process, you have one single global ledger that has everybody's assets digitized on it that can be centrally programmed and controlled. Furthermore, the actual purpose and the intent of this and the end game is to move to a global digital currency where the digital currency is backed by energy credits. So this has been the kind of the goal and the dream of technocracy now since the 1930s. And what I want to do is I want to show you a video clip that just came out. This is Derek Bros put this together. I really encourage you to follow his work. If you don't, he actually put on the People's Reset, but he just released a video yesterday about technocracy. And I've talked about this, about technocracy, basically the form of government where elites pick scientists and engineers to make decisions for everyone. But he actually has a great video clip that I want to show you so that you can see what it's like in more detail. So let me pop this up.
As a technocrat, let's dive in. In the early 20th century, a movement began to develop around a political theory known as technocracy, a system wherein management of governments is handled by technical experts, often involving technology-focused solutions. Early proponents of technocracy claimed that the concept would lead to better management of resources and the protection of the planet. However, this system of governance by technological experts and their technology would also involve a loss of privacy, as well as centralization of power and the management of all human behavior. Although the term appears to have been largely forgotten, the technocratic philosophy and influence can be seen everywhere in our modern digital world.
Already beginning to arrive at the huge civic auditorium, where a large receptive audience turned out to hear Howard Scott as he warned of an impending crisis in America's domestic and foreign affairs.
One of the most influential proponents of technocracy was a man named Howard Scott, a writer who founded the Technical Alliance in New York City in 1919. Scott believed that business owners lacked the necessary skills and data to reform their industry, and thus, control should be handed over to engineers. The technocrats publicized their vision of a centrally planned world via books, speeches, clubs, and political parties. This resulted in a brief period of popularity in the US and Canada in the years following the Great Depression. As politicians and economists searched for a solution to the financial calamity, the technocrats imagined a world where politicians and business owners were replaced with scientists, engineers, and other technical experts who would manage the economy. However, in the 1940s, mainstream interest in the technocracy movement seemed to dissipate. The ideas that underpinned the technocratic vision received a notable endorsement in 1970 when political scientist Zbigniew Brzezinski released his book, Between Two Ages: America's Role in the Technotronic Era. Brzezinski will be familiar to long-term researchers of the ruling elite. Until his death in 2018, Brzezinski was a diplomat who ran in the same circles as David Rockefeller and former Secretary of State and accused war criminal Henry Kissinger. Brzezinski served as advisor to several presidents, from Jimmy Carter to Barack Obama. He was also a member of the Atlantic Council, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Although Brzezinski's book Between Two Ages substituted the term technotronic for technocratic, the depiction of the future is the same: a world in which the scientific and technological elite centrally plan the lives of all humanity. Essentially, Brzezinski's vision is a technologically advanced, authoritarian-style collectivism wherein individual liberties are subordinated to the apparent needs of the collective. When we examine the world of 2025, we clearly see the signs of technocratic influence. For example, we can see this influence in the wealthiest companies and the most influential CEOs. These individuals are running companies that have amassed large amounts of financial wealth as well as unfathomable amounts of digital data on all of their customers. From Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Bill Gates of Microsoft, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, Elon Musk of Tesla and SpaceX, we can see the technocratic ideology. These men and their colleagues in various technological industries wield immense power through their companies, wealth, and cultural influence. These individuals have enough money, resources, and connections to shape elections, geoengineer the climate, and cause dips in the stock market, to name a few examples. They are the technocratic class of 2025.
So I thought it was really, that was great work by Derek Brose. This is actually a small segment from a longer 15-minute clip actually that he had that goes into more detail about Peter Thiel. So I encourage you to check him out, and he has actually the full video available for free on X and on other platforms. So I'm very grateful that he put that together, because I think that he did a great job of actually framing what technocracy is all about, and how we really are in a situation right now with a lot of the people that are surrounding the Trump administration are absolutely technocrats. I've mentioned this before. Elon Musk has tweeted on 3 different occasions about his desire to, when we go to Mars, is to install a technocracy. So a lot of what he's doing with Doge right now, I like and appreciate, because he is truly exposing a lot of the fraud and corruption. My only concern is that it gets replaced with technocracy, because we already know he's a technocrat. His grandfather was the head of the Technocratic Party in Canada. So this is a real threat. So this isn't like a pie in the sky thing or even a conspiracy theory. We are truly in a situation where people are pushing for the globalization of everything and the creation of a single digital currency backed by energy credits. And I talk about this a lot because you hear me talking about Zeno, you hear me talking about tokenization. I've been working on tokenization since 2018. I've been tokenizing and trading all kinds of assets. And it's because whether you like it or not, everything is going to be tokenized. The question that we have is, and a token is just a digital representation of something, but in essence, a token can be an improvement over the current system, which is everything is currently in centralized databases that can be hacked, and where you can actually edit or delete entries. And in some respects, tokenization offers significant improvements for this in terms of security and enabling new commerce in a variety of different ways. But like everything with technology, there's a freedom component to it, and there's a tyranny component to it. And you've probably heard me talk about this time after time. But here's the issue. And I've said this, and this is the frustration that I have with people in the crypto community, because when I say tokenization, what most people think is they think NFTs or meme coins, because by and large, that's almost exclusively what it's been about for crypto. But BlackRock and the large Wall Street players and central banks for the last several years have been working on a different form of tokenization. They have been, as I said, working on figuring out how to tokenize all of our assets, our stocks, our bonds, and everything else. And so we're essentially not deploying this great technology where we actually had a jump on it 16 years ago. We haven't been using it for real commercial applications. We've been using it for, and I don't care if people do these things, but I mean, we've been doing these, zero-sum games, Ponzi schemes, and things that are, they're entertaining, right? I'd consider it a form of gambling, but there's no voluntary commerce in which both parties win coming out of meme coins. And so while we've been obsessing on that, this is what Larry Fink and BlackRock and others have been doing.
Are you planning on issuing any either meme coin ETFs or anything like that now that the animal spirits seem to be very much alive?
I think the Sorkin coin should.
Sorkin coin. We got to do a squat coin. We've talked, Becky and I, we've talked about a squat coin.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are you fascinated by this, by the way? Just the whole phenomenon?
No, I'm not.
You're not.
As a huge believer of crypto and blockchain and tokenization, I want the SEC to rapidly approve the tokenization of bonds and stocks. That will simplify things, make things easier. Some of the tax on BlackRock would never have to vote on a proxy vote anymore, because every owner of record would be notified through a tokenization of equities. And it would save more money for more people. It would bring down the cost of ownership of stock and bonds. So those are the type of financial reforms we need.
Right.
So there you see it. I mean, so Larry Fink he's not interested in meme coins, but he's interested in blockchain technology as it relates to, the multi-trillion-dollar financial services market for stocks and bonds and derivatives. In fact, I think if you add up derivatives, stocks, and bonds, it's like $1.2 quadrillion. It's actually the largest asset class on Earth, and so he's jumping on that. He's looking for this kind of regulatory approval. But I will tell you, I've studied these things. I've written about it in my articles and books. It's not going to be, you're not going to be able to self-custody your tokens, your stocks and bonds. They've already figured out a way, or what they're working on in building out these structures is they're keeping the same third parties that keep the stock market inefficient, and they're just adding them on as a layer. on top of programmable tokens. And so this is moving in the wrong direction, and they've been investing hundreds of millions of dollars on this. And so you've probably heard me, I've been pretty animated about this, but we're at the point right now. I was at a conference in Miami, and somebody played this clip. In fact, I think it was the day this happened, and there were 2 other talks, and everybody was like all excited. They're like, yeah, Larry Fink is interested in tokenization. It's like, yeah, Larry Fink is interested in proposing tokenization, where it's a path to how we'll own nothing and be happy, because it's going to provide, the tyranny aspect of tokenization. And so this is real, and this is a critical component of technocracy, is the interplay between tokenizing assets and then tying those to central bank digital currencies or stablecoins, which, as we'll discuss later, there's really not a difference between the two from a practical standpoint when you're looking at surveillance and programmability. But lastly, and I've talked about this a lot, and you've probably seen me show you this. So if you say, well, they want to change the whole economy, they want to move away from a price-based system to an energy credit-based system, well, that's impossible. How are they going to do that? Well, they've been talking about it since the 1930s, since the beginning of the technocracy movement itself, but they've moved beyond talking about it. And I've mentioned this Doconomy MasterCard before, which is an actual product in the marketplace that people sign up for that shuts off when you've used too much carbon. But rather than me just talk about it, I'm going to show you their own commercial about this product.
In 2018, the United Nations released an urgent report emphasizing the need to cut carbon emissions in half by 2030 in order to avoid an irreversible climate crisis. The average consumer in Sweden causes around 10 tons of carbon emissions each year, of which 60% is linked to consumption. Later in 2018, Doconomy, a Swedish fintech, took on the challenge and launched Do, a mobile banking service for everyday climate action. The Do app is connected to a credit card that enables users to track and measure their carbon footprint from each purchase and to compensate for its impact day by day. This spring, Doconomy took its fight against climate change one step further by adding a premium credit card to its offer. But instead of introducing a premium credit card with the typical benefits that encourages further mass consumption, Doconomy did the opposite by launching Do Black, the world's first credit card with a carbon limit. Simply put, it's the first credit card ever to stop you from overspending. Not based on your available funds, but rather on the levels of CO2 emissions caused by your consumption. Do Black helps you track your climate impact and ensures that you reduce it by 50% in line with the UN 2030 recommendation.
The core purpose of Do Black is not only the ability to measure the impact of your consumption, but also bringing it to a direct halt, making it a radical tool against climate change.
For years, credit cards have put a limit on our credit. Do Black puts a limit on our impact.
So this is real, and you might be horrified like I am in watching that video clip, because what's actually horrifying about it is that people signed up for it voluntarily, and this has been a part of the indoctrination in our schools. I mean, if you actually talk to, like if I talk to my kids are 14, but if you talk to the younger generations, they are learning about climate alarmism in school to the point where it's actually creating anxiety. And, basically the schools are teaching people this idea that you're the carbon that needs to be reduced, or otherwise, the planet is going to self-destruct. And so that kind of messaging and indoctrination works. And this is how you end up with some product like this Doconomy MasterCard. But what you have to understand is, I then started looking into this a little bit more. They did a pilot with this, but you can go to MasterCard's website and you can see the list of all of the partners that they have working on these green initiatives. So they're tracking carbon. And for years, they've been building this infrastructure. So this is why whenever you buy an airline ticket now, it tells you the carbon impact. There are some places where you can go where you'll see a receipt, even if you go to a restaurant, that gives you carbon impact information. So they have been behind the scenes for years, putting in place what they need in order to start measuring carbon credits, carbon output, so that they can move towards a carbon credit-based system. So this isn't now something that's like a technocratic dream that will never be realized. This is something that, you know, because of the internet, because of AI, because of a variety of other things, blockchain technology and CBDCs, this is something that's a real tangible product that they're moving to in the marketplace. So this is what we're up against. We are up against still this movement towards more centralization, movement towards one government, movement towards one digital currency, and movement towards a global platform where all of our assets are digitized and can be programmed and then tied to things like social credit systems with AI surveillance. That is where things are moving, and you can actually see that as you travel around the world. So again, setting the stage, that is the problem, and that remains the problem. And the election didn't change that at all. But I want to talk first and foremost about what the confusion is with this. So when Trump says no, you know, sign an executive order, there will be no CBDC in the United States. And as I'd mentioned before, you know, I was partially responsible for this in a very small way by, when I ran for president, talking to Vivek. Vivek read my book. We talked numerous times about CBDCs. In fact, I tried to get Vivek to sign an anti-CBDC pledge before the primary in New Hampshire, but he had dropped out. Then I was trying to get him to get Trump to sign the anti-CBDC pledge. And then what he did do is he pushed Trump to come out in New Hampshire against CBDCs. And the problem is that now everybody is complacent about this because they think that all of this tyranny is now done and that the good guys won. Well, here's the problem. The problem is that when we talk about this dystopian plan for a global digital currency and where all of the nation states are connected together and all of this is programmable, you have different entities that are actually putting the blame on each other for their role in all of this. And so you have commercial banks, you have the federal government, and you have the Federal Reserve. And it turns out, and I hate the central bank. The central bank should not exist. The Federal Reserve should not exist. It is a useless, unnecessary third party. It is an entity that basically, they print money out of thin air in a database backed by government liabilities, and then they manipulate interest rates to control the supply of money, intentionally causing people to default so that they can steal people's real assets on money that they printed out of thin air, backed by you know, the force of the state and collected by the IRS. It's an absurd system and it needs to go. But when it comes to the actual financial surveillance, it's not the central banks that are pushing this. It's not the central banks themselves that are pushing for tracking people's behavior. That hasn't been really how any of this has worked. And so, you know, as I said, the Federal Reserve is the Federal Reserve. They basically want to control the money supply, get a cut on every financial transaction that happens in the world, and then to be able to, by manipulating interest rates, control the supply of money and take over people's assets. And these are people that will commit genocide. They'll foment both sides of war just for an extra 5% yield. They're horrible people. However, when one of the things that I find the most frustrating is I'll see a politician say, I saw Ted Cruz, I talked to Ted Cruz. He's like, well, yeah, he put forward a bill. It's like, you know, we've got to stop these central banks from acting unilaterally. We need to protect American citizens from financial surveillance. All of the financial surveillance that we have came from Congress. So the Federal Reserve isn't going out of their way to figure out how to track or monitor. Like, it's not even in their best interest to do that. It's not in their financial interest to do that. They're not the origin source for this. I've identified 13 different federal government programs that are used and involved in monitoring and tracking people's financial transactions. And so you have subpoenas and court orders. You have financial intelligence unit requests. You have the Bank Secrecy Act. You have the Patriot Act. You have intelligence gathering. You have something called a national security letter. So the government can come in, they're monitoring all of your transactions using the Patriot Act, bulk data collection from the NSA and everything else. And they can come in and say, hey, we want to shut you down and we're investigating you. And you can't talk to anybody about it, including a lawyer. This is what a national security letter empowers the government to do. There are suspicious activity reports. There's civil asset forfeiture. There were data sharing agreements with other countries, mutual legal assistance treaties, SWIFT monitoring, IRS monitoring using AI. This all exists today. So when somebody says, oh, yay, we're not going to have central bank digital currencies, that doesn't change any of this. That doesn't change any of these programs. This doesn't change any of the surveillance. In fact, if you removed the central bank, and let's say we had a model moving forward where the Treasury was issuing money directly with no person in the middle, you'd probably have more tyranny because you would have the government having direct control and immediate control over all of this surveillance. I was at a conference in Dallas in 2013, and I spoke with a number of these people. I spoke with Senator Ron Wyden from, I believe, Oregon. And because the panel was about, CBDCs, opposition to CBDCs. And there were a bunch of people at this event, and there was, like Cynthia Loomis was there, and Ted Cruz was there, and Warren Davidson was there, a whole bunch of these other politicians. And I'm like, well, I'm surprised Ron Wyden is there. Well, Ron Wyden is there is because, his view is, well, yeah, he doesn't like the central bank either. He wants the government to be able to explicitly control the issuance of money and wants to be able to control its use and its distribution. So getting rid of the central bank does not get rid of digital tyranny. Getting rid of the central bank does not change the technocratic vision of digitizing all of our assets and putting these things into a common framework. And so I think it's critical to point that out because people don't understand that. Everybody thinks that the central bank is the bad guy. The central bank is a useless, horrible third party, but if you get rid of them, you still have all of the negative aspects of controllable, programmable digital currency. And then on top of that, as I said, you had Spider-Man, you have all these three parties pointing fingers at each other. Commercial banks go out of their way to work on their own policies and go above and beyond what Congress tells them to do or anything that comes out of the Federal Reserve. And one area where this is truly notably the case is as it relates to debanking. And while, yes, there was a kind of Operation Choke Point 2.0, a lot of the discretion, and when you actually look at where most of this debanking came from, you're going to find JP Morgan Chase comes at the top of the list, and you're going to then find Bank of America as well. And they were going after people for very specific, targeted political speech. So this had nothing to do with the Federal Reserve, and this wasn't even led by Congress. Three examples of this are Melania Trump, Kanye West, and Dr. Joseph Mercola. So I say all this because state-issued money is the problem. And whether it is issued through commercial banks, whether it's issued through stablecoins, or whether there is a central bank in the middle, it doesn't matter. The root of the problem is going to be the government. But then we have to look at the fact that with the current system that we have, it is the largest banks that own the Federal Reserve. So the banks that are engaging in the worst behavior in terms of debanking, they are JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Citibank. Those are the four largest banks. And these are the banks that are WEF partner companies. These are the banks that were pushing the ESG agenda. These were the banks that were ahead on DEI. So this entire ecosystem of the government, the central bank, and the commercial bank is broken. It isn't just the central bank. So that's a boogeyman that Trump has been able to say, well, these are the bad guys. This is what you needed to worry about. And it isn't what you need to worry about at all. In fact, you need to worry about the government, and you actually need to worry about the Trump administration, which I'll get into shortly. But I do want to play a short clip of this debanking just to show, how bad this is. Here's a clip from Kanye West.
I'm lit. I'm lit. You know what I'm saying? JP Morgan, I put $140 million into JP Morgan, and they treated me like shit. So if JP Morgan Chase is treating me like that, how they treating the rest of y'all?
That's outrageous, yeah.
And this murderers with Chase accounts.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I am outraged. By the time people they want to calm it down.
Because no matter what, you didn't break no law.
I didn't break a law.
No matter what, the bank shouldn't be a judge or jury on anything that's going on.
But this is it's like a social contract. Candace Owens has a word for it, I'm forgetting it. But it's basically like they told Candace Owens she couldn't hang out with me. You know.
So again, we've got three different groups of bad actors here. So this is important to know as we move through the rest of this presentation and start talking about stable coins. And so I wanted to clarify that so that, so you move beyond this idea that it's the central bank that's the focal point of the problem, because they're not. You could remove the central bank, you still have the same problems. But I want to give an update on the global state of CBDCs. And so I often, if I was doing my workshops, this would be an animated map and you'd see what's going on. And as of last year, actually, they haven't even updated this yet. It still says that there are 134 countries globally working at various stages of development on CBDCs, and that this represents 98% of the GDP of the world. Now, if you pull the United States out of that, okay, now it's 133 countries representing 72% of the GDP. And as I will explain, the US is essentially working on the same, effectively what you get out of a CBDC through stablecoins, but overwhelmingly, the majority of the world and the majority of global GDP is working on CBDCs. Not only are they working on it because of Trump's stance, and it's not because they're threatened by the fact that Trump isn't doing a CBDC. I think they're looking at the fact that we're pushing into stablecoins, and that stablecoins as programmable money are going to give the United States a level of control. Imagine if we have programmable stablecoins and Trump decides he wants to place tariffs on this country or that country. Well, that all of a sudden becomes something that's easy to do with a programmable stablecoin. So I want to play a clip to show you that Europe and other places around the world are now accelerating their CBDC efforts.
On your second point, I tend to share your views. Nature doesn't like vacuum. And we started working on the digital euro way back. Actually, when I started my term 5.5 years ago. And I'm not claiming, parentality on the digital euro, because my colleague Benoît Cœuré had already committed a speech on this matter before I arrived. But I certainly carried on with that project, and subsequently Fabio Panetta on the board and then Piero Cipollone, who has replaced Fabio, have taken the lead together with a very, very good team which is focused on accelerating the pace and hopefully campaigning enough with all the stakeholders, meaning European Parliament, meaning European Council, meaning European Commission, so that we can eventually, not put to bed, but put to reality this digital euro. The deadline for us is going to be October of 25, and we are getting ready for that deadline, but we will not be able to move unless the other parties, the stakeholders, as I call them, Commission, Council, and Parliament, actually complete the legislative process, without which we will not be able to move. And I think it is critically important, and it seems to the agnostic or the skeptics, it seems to be more relevant and more of an imperative now than ever before, both on the wholesale and on the retail level, both.
So there you have it. The EU is targeting October of this year to roll out a CBDC. And what she said was that it's important to do on both sides, retail and wholesale. And what that means is to replace cash for day-to-day transactions amongst the people of the EU, and then wholesale is for doing, you know, cross-border transactions and for financial institutions to interact with one another. So clearly this is it's a global agenda, and it's now on an accelerated time frame. So again, the election didn't fix that. It's not like Trump said we're not going to do a CBDC, and now everybody else is saying, well, we're not going to do a CBDC either. It's the reverse. They're actually saying we're going to accelerate our plans for a CBDC. Israel, it was just announced last week, or a little more than a week ago, that they're accelerating their plans for a digital shekel. So they have put forward that plan as well. And so, every week there's more news on this front. And as I have discussed in previous articles, they're not just starting looking at CBDCs. Even in the United States started working on a CBDC in 2018. And the retail CBDC that we have, this Project Hamilton, was a collaboration between MIT and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It actually had one of the Bitcoin core developers, a guy named Corey Field, as one of the co-authors of the white paper. So if you ever hear a central banker say, well, we don't know if we're working on this or whatever, well, what it actually means is we've spent millions of dollars. We've been working on it for 5 years. We've already got a pilot that works, and now we're just refining the final technology. Well, this has been going on globally now with 134 countries involved all around the world. Now, one of the things that I've stated over and over again, and I will have an update today to even prove this point, is that in essence, we already have a CBDC. So I mentioned this earlier. When money is created, it is created when the federal government issues an IOU to the Federal Reserve. And then what the Federal Reserve does is they create an account and they create money out of thin air in an Oracle database. Now, I mean, I could go off on the fact that, the fact that Oracle's first client was the CIA and everything else, that really doesn't matter. But the point is, Oracle is a database, and the Federal Reserve uses an Oracle database, and all of the bills that the federal government pays come out of an account from the central bank through an Oracle database. So by very definition of looking at the words, that is a central bank digital currency. It's also very programmable. But we also have commercial banks, and commercial banks create their own money out of thin air backed by liabilities held in this Oracle database. And they use Microsoft databases and Oracle databases and a whole combination of databases. And here's the thing. Oracle databases and Microsoft databases are programmable. They have been programmable forever. I mean, this is what runs most of the economy. As I said, most economic activity runs on centralized databases, and Microsoft and Oracle are the two leading databases. And so to explain how our money is programmable, if you have a health savings account or a flexible spending account, this is money tied to a bank account. And so the largest provider of HSAs, it's a bank. And so they have, millions of customers, and you get a debit card, and that debit card is pre-programmed. So you can only use the debit card to buy certain healthcare products at certain times from certain locations. Maybe you can use it at Walgreens, you can't use it at CVS, or maybe you can use it for flu-related products, but you can't use it for this. So the whole point that I'm trying to make is that is programmable money on the existing system that we have. So people confuse other things about this. Like there's this idea, there's nothing that says that a CBDC has to be on a blockchain. It just says central bank digital currency. It doesn't say blockchain, digital currency. So if we already have digital currency and it's already programmable, then we're in a real semantic, circle jerk if we're sitting here thinking that we don't already have a CBDC, because we do, and it has all these dystopian features. The other thing is, this ties into some of the concerns that I've had about the Trump administration. RFK came out and said, he wants to make it so that people on food stamps can't use you can't use food stamps for junk food. You can't use food stamps to buy sugary items. So, of course, I started looking into that. And, all right, well, how do food stamps work? Well, food stamps are also debit cards. They're issued at the state level. I think the largest provider of these cards, by the way, happens to be JP Morgan. And they're programmable. So when RFK says, well, yeah, we're going to make it so that people on food stamps can't buy Coke, can't buy Takis or Doritos or junk food or whatever it happens to be, people are like, oh yeah, this is a great idea. We're going to make everybody healthy, not thinking about the fact that this is one more example of where we're now cheering on more programmable money using our existing system, which is already part of a central bank digital currency. Again, money's already trackable. I walked through that. It's already censorable. But I'll play very quickly a short clip from RFK where you can hear him talking about this.
Federal funding of the SNAP program, for example, and of school lunch programs could be a driver for helping kids. We shouldn't be giving 60% of the kids in school processed food that is making them sick. We shouldn't be spending 10% of the SNAP program on sugar drinks. So we have a direct ability to change things there. We also.
So again, that's one area where this is happening. Now, this is something that just happened today. So when I sent out this alert, this really highlights how programmable and trackable our existing money is. So just today, the U.S. Treasury announced that the threshold for currency transaction reports has been lowered from $10,000 to $200 for Americans living in 30 zip codes in California and Texas. So let me unpack that for a second. So right now, you may or may not be aware of this, but if you actually engage in transactions of more than $10,000, they're automatically reported to the Treasury Department. So this is already one of the things baked into law. So when I listed the 13 different ways that we're being tracked, literally we're being tracked. And this started with the Bank Secrecy Act in 1970. We're under the guise of anti-money laundering laws. This is when they first started putting these things in place. And so they've added more and more and more surveillance. And so they're already tracking our transactions over 10,000. But now today, the Treasury, announced that no longer is it a $10,000 threshold, it's $200. Now, of course, similar to the SNAP, you have Maha people saying, oh, great, we're going to make it so that programmable money can't be used to buy junk food. And now there's going to be a segment of MAGA that says, oh, this is great. Look at this. Presumably, if this is in California and Texas, this is probably tied to illegal immigration. This is probably tied to deporting people and a whole variety of things related to this. And so people will cheer this on. But the problem is, what if it's a politician you don't like? What if it's a cause that you don't like? So people didn't like the debanking under Biden. Well, I mean, some of these activities and some of the things that are going on right now, it's the same type of activity. It's just in a different direction. You just happen to agree with the policy. So this just highlights, and I'm glad in a way that this came out today so that I can actually, use this as a way to educate people on the fact that, yeah, these surveillance systems already exist, and this is how easily they can be changed. The Treasury Department can literally just announce, and then all of a sudden, like this, now they're able to track every transaction over $200 in these 30 zip codes. So this should be particularly alarming. So this highlights that, again, our money right now is trackable, but it also shows, and this is one of the things that I was concerned about, is that, if you're not coming at this from a principled perspective, if you're not looking at whether you believe in the Constitution even still exists or not, but if you're looking at it from the standpoint of rights or even natural law, what we have is a situation here where people are just completely not changing their minds. They're just going along with something because now it's part of the in-group. Like, for instance, I saw yesterday, and I haven't watched news for a long time, but Sean Hannity has been someone who has railed against the environmentalism in electric cars, and then yesterday he went out and bought a Tesla. And so, so we have this situation where, to me, this is why I think we're going to see a hyper acceleration of not only trackable digital currencies, but even digital IDs and everything else. And they're going to use things like tariffs. They're going to use things like illegal immigration. And unfortunately, it won't even run into any opposition. So, that is a real concern. So now I want to talk about what stablecoins are and why I think they're a threat, and in many ways a bigger threat even than CBDCs, based on the actual state of their development and who's behind all of this. And to make it very clear, I'm going to start off at a high level, and then I'm going to move to, more levels of granularity. But it is 100% the policy of this administration to push stablecoins. And it has been stated over and over again by Trump and by members of his cabinet that America is going to lead the world in crypto, but then it's actually then morphed recently into we're going to lead the world in stable coins, and that is going to be how we're going to enter this golden age. And so I'm going to show you these quotes just so that it's not like I'm not sitting here, I'm not connecting dots, right? I'm not like, oh, I think this might happen, or I'm projecting that I piece these things together. These are their actual quotes from the administration. So from David Sachs, who is our crypto AI czar, who was part of the PayPal mafia. He was the chief operating officer of PayPal and has been a venture capitalist investing in all kinds of digital currencies and everything else. His quote is, "We'll foster stable coins, but only under strict rules." We have Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary. "Stablecoins must be secure and compliant to protect the dollar's global standing." And this is an important point. Trump has been very adamant about the fact that we're going to make sure that America retains its status as the global reserve currency. And I'll talk in the end about how that, again, that never ends well, but nevertheless, at least what Trump's intentions are. There's not a lot of, there's no speculation here about what's going on. And then you have Howard Lutnick, and there's going to be a lot that I'm going to say about him later in this talk, but he is our U.S. Commerce Secretary, and his quote is, "We're going to use digital assets to pound forward," and Donald Trump is leading the way. And when he said this was actually in the context of stablecoins. And so they really do believe that stablecoins are the way to go. And just to clarify, again, a stablecoin is it's a digital token where, one token equals $1. So it's basically a digital token that is backed by dollars or treasuries that equals $1. So it doesn't, well, I have more to say about this later, but the whole point of crypto was to have peer-to-peer digital cash that didn't have central banks, didn't have central authorities, and that would enable people to engage in commerce. Now what we've done is we've taken fiat, we've taken the dollar, which has lost 98% of its value since 1913, and now we've added a layer of technology on top of it that is programmable, trackable, also hackable. And so we've actually managed to take fiat and make it more risky, but also more heavily weighted in surveillance, which is a huge loss in terms of what cryptocurrency was supposed to be about. There are two competing bills right now related to this. Last year, there was a Bitcoin conference in Nashville, and you had all these politicians. RFK was there, Trump was there, Cynthia Lummis was there, and they talked about all these things, a Bitcoin strategic reserve, and they started to talk about these stablecoin bills. And then this became part of the first 100 days of Trump's administration was to put in place stablecoin bill legislation. Now, the way that this was propagandized was, and these are always buzzwords, but it's like, well, we need to provide rules of the road. What the market wants is clarity. And, the market doesn't actually want clarity. The existing incumbent players want clarity. The people, the entrenched interests want clarity. And more accurately, they want enough time to be able to buy enough political influence so that rather than being disintermediated or losing their market position, they figure out a way using the state and using laws to take over the innovative technology. That's always what those things mean. So there's a Stable Act that was introduced on February the 6th. You have Representative French Hill from Arkansas, who's the chair of the House Financial Services Committee. And then you have a guy named Representative Brian Stile, who's a Republican from Wisconsin. He's on the House subcommittee focused on cryptocurrency. So that's one bill. That's not the main bill. There's another development as of today, which is called the Genius Act. And it was introduced on February the 4th. And from the very outset, this was the bill that had a target passage date of Trump's first 100 days, so by the end of April. And I will say today they just had a vote and it did get out of committee. I think it was a vote of 18-6. So now this Genius Act stablecoin bill is going to move to the full Senate for a vote. And the main people behind this are Senator Bill Hagerty, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Cynthia Lummis. If you've been following me for a while, you may have heard me talk about a Lummis-Gillibrand bill, because for the last 2 years, in 2023 and in 2024, Lummis and Gillibrand had put forward legislation that addressed stablecoins and addressed a lot of these topics before. And if you heard me talking about it, I was not very charitable, I guess, in my analysis of it, because these bills basically gave more control to banks, more control to the Federal Reserve for oversight, and then they specifically targeted decentralized finance, DeFi, and algorithmic stablecoins, outright bans on those. So I've been very critical of this. The Genius Act is actually worse. It actually has more, it's tighter regulation, and it's very clear, and I'll go through the specifics of it, of what the intent is for this, but somehow they made it worse. So they went from the standpoint of where you might think, well, Lummis-Gillibrand, it's a bipartisan bill, but Biden was president, so they were probably just trying to get something through, and it was probably something that, you know, wasn't ideal, but they thought it might be might be feasible politically. And then now Trump wins and there's Republican majorities, and they actually made it worse and more dystopian. This is going to be hard to see. I'm going to put this up, but I'm going to explain at a high level what the impact of this is. And this kind of compares the Stable Act and the Genius Act. And eventually they'll reconcile these two bills. But in essence, there are common themes for both bills. So big banks exercise and get more control over stablecoins in both of these acts. Now, the Genius Act is focused only on payments. So the use of stablecoins, again, a coin that's where one coin is backed by $1. The Genius Act focuses on the use in payments to buy and sell things, but does leave some area for things like DeFi. So people that are doing decentralized finance or even doing cross-border payments, there's a whole category of different things. Those things are not considered payments. The House bill actually controls all aspects of stablecoins, not just the use of stablecoins for payments. And so the Stable Act will actually just crush decentralized finance. It gives more control both to regulators and to the Federal Reserve for oversight. There are all kinds of reporting requirements. And so this is one of these typical deals where, you know, the reporting requirements are so high. And because you have to be a registered financial institution, then what that's going to mean is any private stablecoin companies are going to have to be acquired by large banks in order to be able to comply, which is what I think the intent of all of this is. But it's going to stifle innovation because of all of the reporting and audit requirements that are put in here. It's going to, again, it's going to be bad for stablecoin issuers unless you're a bank. It's going to be very damaging to the DeFi ecosystem. It pushes CBDCs in a way because, again, now you do have a programmable form of money that is tightly regulated by the government and overseen by the Federal Reserve. So it doesn't matter if the programmable digital currency is issued by from our perspective, from a privacy perspective and from a surveillance perspective, I don't care whether Jerome Powell issues the digital currency or Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase issues it. It's the same from the standpoint of tyranny. I mean, it's bad for privacy because it's all these bank secrecy laws, anti-money laundering laws, KYC laws. So if you've ever had to deal with crypto, I mean, even getting on an exchange now, you have to go through biometric identification and everything else. And so now this is going to become the norm. So it's going to become more difficult to use stable coins than it is even to use a bank account or use a crypto account. There's an aspect of this where it seems to me that, and I'll get into this, this bill to me is all about giving complete control of stablecoins to large banks. But there are two private players, USDC and Tether. And I think the Senate bill was designed with a carve out to allow Tether to continue to exist, because it allows foreign issuers to still be able to issue these currencies, whereas the House bill does not. So there's even more control. So, but again, they're going to reconcile these bills, and when they reconcile these bills, you always get the worst case scenario. You always get more regulation. So arguably, this is good for, you know, Monero, Xano, and Bitcoin. I mean, to the extent you're, you know, making your Bitcoin private, it is going to be good for those that are actually interested in using alternative currencies, because this is both of these stablecoin bills are going to increase the tracking and programmability of the dollar. I mean, it is the digital dollar in, you know, tokenized form. So that is where we are. And I encourage you, if you don't believe me, you can read these bills. I'm writing an article. I'm finishing up the article. I've actually written it, but I'm editing it now for the Brownstein Institute. So everything that is in this talk is going to be there with links, but you can download both of these bills, and you can either read them yourself or you can run them through AI, or do both, which is what I did. The Genius bill is only 57 pages, and you can skim through a lot of it, but it's in there in black and white. So this is not great if you're, you know, interested in privacy. So again, I go back to where people are celebrating that Trump is against the CBDC, but what is the practical effect of that if they're hyper accelerating stablecoin bills? And Biden was incompetent at pushing CBDCs. He was great at lawfare, but he had no ability to actually push through or get a CBDC implemented. As you'll see here, I mean, the people that are behind this, pushing the bills, funding the bills, and then even companies like Tether and USDC and their ties to the Trump administration, they will be able to get this done. And they will have these rolled out this year. And in some cases, some of these private stablecoins already exist, but they'll probably be subsumed by, or will be even more tightly regulated by, the federal government. So I'm going to walk through now some of the Trump administration ties to stablecoins. And I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to make up a conspiracy theory here. The main point of me actually pointing this out is just to show you for how long people at Tether and the USDC have actually been working with people in the Trump administration, and how much influence they have at this point in time, just so that, you know, you don't walk away from this thinking, oh, well, none of this is ever going to happen, because it's been happening. And I want to take a brief step back, because it's important to understand the influence of the PayPal mafia on the Trump administration overall. So the PayPal mafia, this is a group of people that worked at PayPal and related companies. And you may not know all of these people. These are famous entrepreneurs and famous investors. But I'm going to point out a few of them. One, Elon Musk was a co-founder of PayPal, along with, excuse me, Peter Thiel. And so, of course, we know Elon Musk's ties to the administration and what he's doing at Doge. But one thing that I think is very important for people to think about and to put on the radar, Elon has announced that X is going to be rolling out X payments this year. What they've been doing is they've been working on getting money transmitter licenses in all 50 states. So you can imagine a scenario here where if we have stable coins, one or more stable coins, and then X payments integrates that, then all of a sudden you're logging onto X. And if you go through the process of getting your blue check mark or whatever, you're already going through a identification process through a company tied to Israeli intelligence. And then you're going to be using X payments, which is something that will likely be integrated with one or more stable coins. And so I want you to just start thinking about what the implications of this are in the broader context of this move towards technocracy. So you have Elon Musk, you have Peter Thiel, who is all over this administration. He hasn't not been public about it, but Peter Thiel is the co-founder of Palantir, which is one of the largest contractors to the CIA. Peter Thiel is the reason J.D. Vance is the vice president. He actually introduced J.D. Vance to Trump and actually lobbied and pushed for that to happen. And so, you know, he's been a big proponent of obviously digital payments and technocracy as well. And you can watch that other Derek Bros piece. And then you have down here David Sachs. So David Sachs was the chief operating officer of PayPal. He is now the AI and crypto czar for the United States. And he's also heading this digital assets conference. And he's been the one stating that America is going to lead the way. So the PayPal mafia is all over this administration. So to give you a quick summary of each of these companies. So Circle is the company that owns USDC. And just a little bit of background about that. So again, USDC is a digital coin that's always worth $1. They currently have a market cap of about $25 billion. Now they've raised over $1 billion from big investors like Goldman Sachs, Visa, and BlackRock. And Goldman Sachs was one of their very early investors. And unlike Tether, which I'll talk about in a minute, they do audits. So at least that's a plus. So they do audits and proof that they actually have the assets underlying the token, so that, you know, if I say one token's worth $1, then that means I actually have the dollars to back that up. So they do audits for that. But I want to note that at one point in time, USDC had $3.3 billion in Silicon Valley Bank. So again, I think that these stablecoin ideas are ridiculous because the core problem is fiat currency itself, which always fails. Now you're adding technical risk and other risk on top of that. But they had $3.3 billion in one bank, which means that that would have only been FDIC insured for $250,000. As I recall, and I've been trying to find the clip, David Sachs was literally, I think, on a podcast or on an interview crying about Silicon Valley Bank. So when you watch these VCs like Jason Calacanis and these people on the All In podcast or whatever, remember when that bank was failing, they were crying everywhere, writing op-eds for the Wall Street Journal. They all got bailed out. And Circle is one of the companies that got bailed out. So I say this just to, one, show how risky stablecoins are, even worse than fiat, but then also to show how rank the cronyism is here. And I'm going to read this just because I enjoy writing this. It was cathartic for me to write this response. This is Jeremy Allaire. He is the CEO of USDC. But I wrote this response to this just because of how absurd even the concept of stablecoins are. But he'd put out this tweet: tap to pay using USDC on iPhones, incoming soon. Wallet devs, start your engines. To which I wrote, the sheer unadulterated gall of it all. The cryptocurrency revolution, we were told, was all about freedom, about liberation from the shackles of the existing financial order, about the creation of a new peer-to-peer system of exchange, unencumbered by the suffocating grip of third-party intermediaries. Bitcoin, the original cryptocurrency, was supposed to be the embodiment of this ethos, a decentralized, trustless, and permissionless system in which transactions could be conducted directly, without the need for banks or governments or any other parasitic middlemen. But alas, it seems the ideals of the early cryptocurrency enthusiasts have been utterly betrayed. The latest innovation to be touted by the cryptocurrency crowd is the integration of USDC, a stablecoin pegged to the value of the US dollar, into Apple's iPhone via the tap-to-pay feature. This, we are told, is a major breakthrough, a game changer, a revolutionary development that will bring cryptocurrency to the masses. But let us take a step back and examine the sheer mind-boggling complexity of this innovation. In order to use USDC on an iPhone, one must first have an iPhone, which is, of course, a product of Apple, one of the largest and most powerful corporations in the world. Then one must have a wallet app, which is developed by a third-party company, and which must be approved by Apple before it can be installed on the iPhone. And then, of course, there is the USDC itself, which is issued by a consortium of companies, including Circle and Coinbase, and which is backed by a reserve of US dollars held in a bank account, subject to all the usual risks and uncertainties of the traditional financial system. So let us count the number of third-party intermediaries involved in this, quote, peer-to-peer transaction. Apple, the wallet developer, Circle, Coinbase, the bank holding the reserve, and of course the US government, which guarantees the value of the dollar. This is not a peer-to-peer system, my friends. This is a Rube Goldberg machine, a complex and convoluted system of intermediaries, each taking a cut, each adding a layer of risk and uncertainty to the transaction. And what of the risks, you might ask? The risks are legion. There's the risk of Apple's iPhone being hacked or compromised in some way. There's the risk of the wallet app being buggy or insecure. There's the risk of Circle or Coinbase being hacked or going bankrupt. There's the risk of the bank holding the reserve being insolvent or experiencing a liquidity crisis. And of course, there's the risk of the US government itself defaulting on its debt or experiencing a catastrophic loss of confidence in its currency. This, my friends, is not a recipe for freedom or liberation. This is a recipe for disaster, a catastrophe waiting to happen. And yet the cryptocurrency enthusiast will tell you this is the future, that this is the way forward, that this is the solution to all of our financial woes. So I read that because I think that actually pretty clearly articulates how far off base we have gotten even with these stablecoins. And these are private stablecoins before they get merged into the banking system and regulated under these Genius and stablecoin bills. So let me talk a little bit about USDC, Circle, and their ties to Trump. So first and foremost, they just donated $1 million. They made $1 million donation to Trump's inauguration committee. Now we can take a step back. Trump's previous Treasury Secretary is a guy named Steve Mnuchin. And Mnuchin overlapped with this guy named Brian Brooks at a company called One West Bank. Brian Brooks later became Coinbase's chief legal officer. So this tells you, this is really interesting, this Brian Brooks guy. So he was pushing a digital dollar by Circle, which was co-founded with Coinbase and the Center Consortium, pegged 1-to-1 for the dollar. He was Coinbase's chief legal officer, and then he became the acting comptroller under Steve Mnuchin in the Treasury Department in 2020 and was pushing private digital currencies and boosting USDC's growth. So the ties to USDC literally involve one of the top people at USDC working in the Treasury Department, actively working to promote a digital dollar. So this is not even a new concept. This is something that has been going on for quite some time. So that's Circle. Tether, also called USDT, is also a digital coin that is pegged allegedly to the dollar, where 1 Tether equals $1. It is by far the largest player in this space. They have a market cap of $140 billion. And their investors are even shadier. It's a company based in the British Virgin Islands. It has Brock Pierce. You can look into his background. Sam Bankman-Fried was an investor. And then more recently and more alarmingly, Howard Lutnick, his firm, he was the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, just invested $600 million in Tether and manages all of Tether's treasuries. So all of the assets that Tether claims are backing the $140 billion worth of tokens in the marketplace are being managed by the firm owned by the guy who's now the US Commerce Secretary. That's a little bit of a conflict. Importantly, Tether has never been able to complete an audit. And on numerous occasions, they've run into issues with this. They were fined $41 million by the CFTC in 2021 for misleading investors about their reserves. And in fact, in the time period that the CFTC examined this, Tether only had reserves about 27% of the time. So it wasn't fully backed 1-to-1. And they've had ongoing legal problems. They had an issue that they also settled with the state of New York, and ongoing probes into money laundering risk. The other thing is, there's a heavy correlation and intertwine between Tether and Bitcoin. And I could have this big whole diagram on this, but essentially, one of the large investors in Tether is also an investor in Bitfinex, which is a large cryptocurrency exchange. And there was an analysis done it's debated, but that suggests that well over half of the increase, the pump in the price of Bitcoin in 2017 was due to Tether. Now, I want to paint a scenario here for you. So imagine this. So we already know that the dollar and the Federal Reserve prints money out of thin air backed by nothing. But what if Tether is also printing fake tokens, not even backed by fake fiat? And then that is what's being used to pump the price of Bitcoin. So there is speculation that that's happened. Somebody at the University of Texas actually did an analysis about this. And so, I mean, so it's conceivable that we're dealing with like a meta Ponzi scheme here. I'll talk a little bit more about Howard Lutnick. And so, you know, I mean, just the conflicts on this are incredible. So not only did his firm make a $600 million investment, not only did they manage the treasuries, but they've never passed an audit, but yet he's actually come out, he's come out and basically said, well, Tether has the reserves. Basically, he said, trust me, bro, on $140 billion. And to me, in a way, it wouldn't be surprising. I encourage you to look at Whitney Webb and CoffeeZilla, and you can dig into this some more. There's Bitfinex, which is an account on X. There's a whole bunch of information about the backgrounds of the people in Tether and kind of the whole origin of this. And I mean, it is beyond shady. The other thing is, Lutnick is the Commerce Secretary, so focusing on forming, you know, trade relationships with other countries. Tether just relocated to El Salvador. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. And I will tell you, we may very well have in the makings, you know, if you've ever seen that movie, The Big Short, we may be in the middle of The Big Short 2.0. And the thing is, with political connections like this is the kind of scenario that leads to, you know, if Tether all of a sudden blows up, then the government gets involved and there's something like TARP, and then the Federal Reserve ends up bailing it out, because this is how tightly intertwined now the administration is on multiple angles. And so you now have a Commerce Secretary, the Treasury Secretary, and the AI crypto czar all pushing this same agenda. So it's going to be really hard for these people to admit if these things turn out to be a scam or that maybe this isn't a good idea. So again, another reason for a red flag. The other thing that from the standpoint of stablecoins being like CBDCs, Tether and CBDC are already kind of programmable, trackable, freezable, and they're already working with the feds. This has been going on for years. Now, you'll look at some of these examples and you may say, well, hey, this sounds legitimate. And some of these may be, legitimate cases, but they froze, Tether froze $12 million in 2024 related to an alleged scam. They seized 1.4 million on some other case involving an unhosted wallet. USDC had a crisis, and actually, my understanding is the Federal Reserve did step in and bailed out Silicon Valley Bank, and part of that bailed out USDC. Had Silicon Valley Bank not been bailed out, USDC would have been bankrupted. We've had USDC tornado cash freezes, Russian funds blocked, Tether froze $435 million worth of wallets. So again, my point here is this is programmable digital money. So this doesn't. So these stable coins are not exactly providing extra value. And if you're looking at these, I think the administration and everybody is looking at this. Well, we're not doing CBDCs, but we're doing stable coins. And then people are not questioning, well, what is a stable coin? What does it mean that it's a stable coin? Is that better or worse? I mean, how is it? Would it be worse if the Federal Reserve was issuing the token versus a company like Tether that may not even be backed one for one, but still can do all of the tracking and have all of the money frozen? I don't know. You tell me. But to me, it isn't very clear that this is a more advantageous situation. Now, when I analyze these bills, I will tell you, this is just a prediction. So this is pure speculation on my part. But in particular, looking at the bill in the Senate, which is likely to be the dominant bill, and it's definitely the bill that will be passed first, I think that these bills are designed to make it so that in the end, Tether ends up being acquired by JP Morgan Chase, and Circle USDC ends up being acquired by Goldman Sachs. So then what you're going to have is a situation where you have a programmable digital token issued by a large banking institution, the same banking institutions that have been involved in debanking and doing all of the other things that people don't like, with even tighter regulation under these bills. So this is a very unfortunate circumstance. Whether this turns out to be the outcome or not, I don't know, but it certainly looks like it. And the reason I came up with this analysis is just simply based on the size of Tether, $140 billion, but the fact that the compliance requirements under these bills and the fact that you have to be a regulated financial institution will make it so that they have to partner up with one of these banks. Now, imagine a situation like this. And this is why I want people to think kind of outside of the box of just saying, oh, well, we don't have a CBDC. I don't have anything to worry about. Well, imagine Trump comes in and abolishes the Federal Reserve, and then the Treasury starts issuing directly to JP Morgan Chase after it acquires Tether. Is that a better outcome? I mean, again, we don't have the third party in the middle taking a cut, but the lens that I'm looking through this is tracking programmability and it being the gateway to social credit systems and integrating with this global platform where all of our assets are tokenized. So if you get rid of the Federal Reserve and you had the Treasury issuing security tokens through JP Morgan Chase, through Tether, that I'm arguing is not any better at all than having a CBDC. But it is more likely to actually get done, and it is more likely to get done in a very short period of time, not in decades. But if the ECB is working on their CBDC by October, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't have something more substantial with larger banks issuing or some of these mergers happening by October of this year as well. That's why I put urgency behind this, because we're very quickly going to be in a place where everybody has just accepted CBDC level digital tyranny without questioning it or understanding it because a different label was put on it. So now the question is, what is the solution? And I go back to, and I wrote an article about this as well. We already have a CBDC, but there are levels of tyranny. And I think my article was 50 Shades of Central Bank Digital Tyranny. We're already at this kind of level 2 in the middle, where systemic bondage, where we already have widespread surveillance. It's already digital. There are increasingly restrictions, which again we're seeing with things like the food stamp program or with what Trump did today. The end game worst case scenario is one global digital currency, complete surveillance, all of our assets digitized. But we're already kind of DEFCON 3. We're not sitting here worrying about something that we're in the middle of it right now. We're the frog boiling in the pot right now. The solution to this remains the same. And in fact, what I'm trying to do is, the challenge for me is, a year ago, people were concerned about CBDCs, and people were starting to wake up, learning about central banks. They were starting to learn about privacy coins and everything else. And then literally they just shut off. And so the response that I get from people is, oh yeah, well, Trump said we're not going to have that. So now they're not looking into any of this. They're not understanding what any of this means. And if you look at what the politicians say versus what is actually in the bills, it's all propaganda, which last week I also touched a bit on the Bitcoin strategic reserve. That's also propaganda. They're making a claim that there's no taxpayer money involved, which is 100% false. And I've documented that and I've tweeted about that as well. But it's complicated because now it's more things to explain to people. So I am still, I'm working on new workshops and figuring out a way to make an online workshop so that we can onboard more people. I still recommend Cake Wallet, which is integrated Zeno, so you actually have multiple privacy coins in one easy to use wallet. There is something called Confidential Layer that should be launching this month that will allow you to take your Bitcoin Cash, and Ethereum and bridge it into Zeno. So now it's private. So now it's not on this surveillance ledger where it can be tracked. I did talk a couple of days ago about the fact that, often people in crypto and Bitcoiners will say, oh, I lost my keys in a boating accident. And it turns out that actually isn't even a valid excuse. Now that they can actually track people's ownership through chain analysis, you're actually not going to be able to pull that off. And in fact, you may, in the future, if you lose your crypto and you don't report it, you may end up having liability related to that. So privacy remains important. I'm continuing to work on the Karma, which is the gold-backed privacy token that you'll be able to redeem 1-for-1 for gold, but that has the privacy, excuse me, and other features of Zeno. And so, you can learn more about all of this. So the updated daylightfreedom.org website has information about all of this. So all of the up-to-date articles on CBDCs, stablecoins, which will be published soon. I'm going to do another one on the Bitcoin strategic reserve. And then this also contains up-to-date resources on what I'm using in terms of recommended wallets and that kind of thing. All of that is available for free. My purpose in doing this is to just get people to stop using fiat currency and to stop, and to stop the spread of whether it's central bank digital currency or stablecoin digital currency. I guess I need to come up with a new acronym instead of calling it CBDC tyranny. But nevertheless, there is still CBDC tyranny, and 72% of the rest of the global GDP is moving full speed ahead. So I'd love to open this up for questions. I actually did send some links. I was going to get some people to come on for an interactive Q&A. If anybody wants to come on and join live, I can give you a link for StreamYard here. In fact, I'll put it in the notes here. So I would definitely love to get feedback on this. I mean, I know there's a lot of information in this, and this is the problem with this, is you got to explain what is a stable coin, what are these relationships like, what is this bill like. It's easier if you can just say, oh, well, the central bank is going to issue a currency and it's going to be one thing and it's going to take over. This is now more difficult to explain, but the threat is worse than under Biden, because again, we could have these things all implemented, starting this year, as opposed to way out in the future. And the only way to combat it is, and actually I thought I had interesting, there's a whole series of slides that didn't come in here, but I have talked about it before. So fiat currencies have a 0% success rate. The average fiat currency only lasts for 27 years. There are 7 main reasons that a fiat currency fails, whether it's economic mismanagement or corruption or overexpenditure on the military, competition, technology, etc. And usually when a currency fails, Zimbabwe, whatever it happens to be, Argentina at various points in time, they've had, again, eventually it hits everyone. But usually when a currency fails, it's for, 1 or 2 out of the 7 reasons. And if you actually go through the list of the 7, the US is flashing bright red on all 7. And so, we keep on having this process where we flip from one global reserve currency to another, expecting that somehow that's going to give us a different result. And it doesn't. If it fails 100% of the time, then maybe we ought to try a different approach. And the different approach is to separate money and state. The reason I'm doing the gold token is, and it'll be interesting to see if we ever get an audit of Fort Knox. I suspect we probably won't, but the problem is state-based money. Even when the nation has gold and backs their currency by gold, what ends up happening is they just decide arbitrarily, well, we need to increase the money supply. We want to buy more things. We want to bribe more voters. And so they just abandon the gold standard. So that's happened not just in the United States in the early 70s. This is commonly what happens. And so the idea is, well, what if you had a currency that had nothing to do with the state, nothing to do with government spending, nothing to do with politicians, whose purpose is just to be a currency that anyone anywhere in the world can use for peer-to-peer cash and for daily transactions. And so I just realized I didn't send out a link. I'm going to have a couple people join to do kind of a interactive conversation, but I did put the link to the StreamYard in the notes. So if you want to join as well, happy to talk about this. I'd love to get some feedback and just, I want to make sure this was clear and that what I said actually made any sense, because I'm sure it was a lot in a short period of time. So I want to make sure that that people understand this material, because there's a lot of propaganda out there. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Hey, Aaron. How are you doing tonight?
Good.
Great show so far.
It's good. I went through a lot of material. This was it was kind of an update of everything that I've been talking about for the last couple of years, but with the big update on what's going on with stablecoins, even as of today, the accelerated push for stablecoins and the fact that the Treasury Department basically just said, so under current law today, any transaction over $10,000 gets flagged and sent to the Treasury. They just today changed the rule so that in 30 different zip codes in California and Texas, they reduced that threshold from $10,000 to $200. So what that means is, most transactions in these 30 zip codes are now being directly tracked by the Treasury. And so it's important, because I always harp on the fact that we already have a central bank digital currency, that we already have all this surveillance. And that move today by the Treasury Department highlights that. And now with this stablecoin bill that's going to give control of stablecoins to the banks with oversight by the Federal Reserve, we are going to effectively get what everybody was worried about under Biden with CBDCs, except it's going to be issued by Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan, or it will be, merged, Tether and USDC will merge in with one of the larger banks. And then, we're going to end up with the same dystopian nightmare.
Good. Thanks for the show, Aaron. This is great. You're really summarizing a lot of the things that I don't think most people have been able to wrap their head around. The big question now is, what can people do today, tomorrow, to prepare for alternatives?
It's to start using alternatives. One of the things I said during the talk, and I hold to it, is like the whole purpose of this. People ask me all the time, "Oh, why don't you go testify in front of Congress?" It's because Washington, D.C. is not persuaded by information. That's not actually what is driving this process. There's a lot of money that has gone into, effectively funding a lot of these congressional campaigns. A lot of these elected officials now own these cryptocurrencies, so nobody's going to have any interest in actually changing course just because the facts are inconvenient. And in fact, further to this point, Cynthia Loomis and the Loomis-Gillibrand bill, which was the precursor to this Genius bill, she's been very adamant against privacy. And you will hear everybody rally around this idea of, we have to have all of these protections in place to protect against terrorism and money laundering. That is like the trigger word. That is like we're going to get the fear of God into people about, if we don't track all of this stuff, we're going to have terrorism and money laundering. The reality is, as we've learned, the Treasury Department spent $4.7 trillion and didn't actually take notes or document where the money went. So we don't even know where all of the payments went. We also know that the person that was in charge of disbursements basically never said no to anything. And it turns out the Treasury Department was directly funding terrorist activities. So the problem that we have is, we were supposed to have this constitutional form of government where the role of the federal government was explicitly defined as to what their area was, and everything outside of that either goes to the states or goes to the individuals. But then on top of that, we have the Fourth Amendment, where privacy is critical. And somehow this is morphed into, if you've got nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about, it kind of mentality. And it works. So there are a lot of people that just actually believe this now. And there's no evidence that the bank secrecy laws or the anti-money laundering laws have done anything to actually stop money laundering or terrorism. The original bill was passed in 1970, the Bank Secrecy Act, and the purpose of it was to stop organized crime. Well, guess what? It didn't work. So we're sitting here now, we're talking about how bad cartels are and how bad everything else is. Well, wasn't that taken care of with the Bank Secrecy Act? And of course it wasn't. So when you look at what they were trying to do in 1970, and then what the effect was they've added all of these costs, all of this tracking, all of the violation of our constitutional rights, and they haven't stopped any criminals. And they've added an incredible cost and economic burden to the economy. So anyway, the point of it is, exit the dollar, start using privacy coins, start using gold and silver. That is the answer, because the root of the problem isn't the central bank. It's the central bank and the government and the commercial bank. It's all three of them. So getting rid of the central bank does not get rid of digital tyranny, it does not get rid of programmable money, and it does not stop the halt of technocracy.
You had mentioned confidential layer on the Zano blockchain, could they potentially, is that like a wrapping, like people would wrap on Ethereum or with DeFi, or is that something different?
It's basically a bridge. There are nodes, so that's there's no third party involved. It uses threshold signatures. I'm not going to go into all the detail of it, but basically it's going to be as easy as you'll have a wallet and you'll connect. I want to go from Bitcoin to Zano within the wallet, and it will basically lock your Bitcoin, and then on the other end you'll have tokens that represent your Bitcoin with no like third party in the middle. It's an actual blockchain itself that is decentralized with a bunch of nodes that actually make that entire process happen. But the key to it is that the fees are actually low, because a lot of the stuff, when you're talking about wrapping something with Ethereum, then now you're dealing with a smart contract that can be hacked, and then you have a whole bunch of different fees. I think the fees for this are like 0.5%. So it's dramatically less expensive. And then just to go through the process, there's no third party, there's no smart contract. It's an instant thing that you can do within the wallet, and then you can actually spend your Bitcoin with the privacy features of Zano, which is the same essentially security model and privacy model as Monero.
And I would imagine my next question would be more for Zano developers. So, if can you touch on whether or not holders of other coins would be able to get on that confidential layer?
Of other coins?
Yeah, meaning like, XRP or, whatever, the hot coin of the month is for other people.
For right now, the focus was just on Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and Ethereum. They may add more. I think that there's some complexity and some issues related to it. It's probably not going to be something where they're just going to add the hot coin of the day, just because it's a lot of work, and then it's actually taxing on the system that might raise fees for some of the other stuff. But they might. But for right now, I mean, if you look at the market caps of Bitcoin Cash, and Ethereum, that actually gives you a lot of purchasing power that will then be able to be spent in a private way.
All right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, Cake Wallet holds a bunch of different privacy coins. And before some of these laws come into effect, that might limit, and I realize you're not a lawyer or whatever, but so people should start getting and using privacy coins and get private as quickly as possible.
Well, yeah, you should get private as quickly as possible, if for no other reason that what we've learned is a lot of people don't realize how trackable their Bitcoin is. And I know we talked about this the other night, but I mean, I've had multiple people in the last 90 days that I've dealt with that have gotten involved in situations where there's chain analysis being done, and there's kind of legal processes going on where people are actually looking at this and looking at these transactions and tracing the blockchain. And so there are all of these new forensic people involved, and now they're mapping out the blockchain. So it's become important in Bitcoin, and people may or may not be aware of it, but they certainly should be. When the reason they should be aware of it is that the US just announced a Bitcoin strategic reserve that is funded by 200,000 Bitcoin that was stolen through civil asset forfeiture. And that shows you what you need to know about the ability for Bitcoin to be tracked and for people to be able to confiscate it through legal mechanisms. There was another guy that they were able to, they tracked his Bitcoin. They knew it was his Bitcoin, and he refused to give up his keys. And so they're now fining him $10,000 a day until he turns over his keys. And so, so it's going to be critical that people move to privacy coins or start bridging their transparent coins into this, because look, you have to be concerned about the Trump administration. It doesn't matter what the administration is, but look at what Trump is doing. If they're going to change the programmability of food stamps, and then they're going to start adding new tracking and reporting, on everything over $200 in 30 specific zip codes, we're clearly moving towards more surveillance and more programmability, even under Trump. So even if you have a bullish scenario of Trump, Trump is moving more towards more programmability and more surveillance.
So they can pretty much, anybody that says they lost their Bitcoin in a boating accident at this point, they can track that down, freeze it, and at this point hunt these people down with the BTC.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly right. Now, I mean, if somebody mined Bitcoin and then never spent any of it, and then they claim they lost it in a boating accident, okay. But I mean, at some point, if you want to use it, it's going to be tracked. And so, we're not very far away from a situation where you're going to have to register your Bitcoin. We already got last year in the IRS regulations, you have to start reporting your self-custody crypto holdings. So it's not, all of this legislation and all these politicians talk about the fact that they're going to protect self-custody, but that doesn't mean they're going to protect information about your self-custody assets. In fact, it's the opposite of that. Well, okay, great. Now I've got a self-custody asset and the government knows everything that I spend because it's tracked on a public blockchain. Why is that exciting? I see.
So that $200 reporting to the Treasury, then that also applies to things like Venmo, Zelle, Cash App?
Yeah, I mean, if those services are tied to bank accounts that are in those zip codes, then presumably yes. I don't know for sure what's involved in tracking the existing system, other than the 13 different programs that I laid out for how our existing financial system is already surveilled. Yeah, somebody wrote, they do everything that they accuse we the people of in version world. I mean, this is exactly true. The Treasury doesn't account for their money. They fund terrorists. And then we have to comply with biometric screening and report to the IRS anything over $600 through Venmo. I mean, it's backwards of what it is supposed to be. And it's not like they're actually, and it's never about catching criminals. It's always about control. That's been the whole push, even from the head of Bank of International Settlements for CBDCs. The whole push is not about convenience. It's about control. So we have a new guest on here, Don Finley. Hi, Don.
Hey there. How's it going? I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. And first of all, thank you. Thank you so much. Right from your first book, that opened my eyes to what's really going on. It's amazing. I had no idea. I've been a monetary reformer for 30 years, and I wonder if you could address the fundamental problem of all money systems is that they're based in debt.
Yep.
So you can craft a new weapon, a new handgun, put in a new model, make it out of gold or silver or whatever. But unless you get into the underlying problem that all money is debt that carries the burden of interest, that we rent everything from, it doesn't matter whether it's a government or whether it's from corporations, because both are in the money game and both are printing money and charging interest and enslaving, our lives by this burden that we have to carry around. So, this is a perfect opportunity. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to actually get enough people interested in thinking about what would be a better system to introduce the idea of a debt-free money system and do a jubilee and release people from all the existing debt and start all over again. What do you think? Can you get into this?
I don't know what the exact solution is, but what I've been looking at recently are this idea of network states. I'm certainly a fan of separating money and state, and I think that having money tied to government and tied to the issuance of debt, well, it doesn't work. It's never worked, and it's a bad idea, and it always ends the same way because it is based on debt. Politicians always move towards spending more money, and so it's this debt-based money that creates the boom and bust nation states. So I think just separating money and state and having money that isn't actually tied to government is an interesting approach. And there's another thing going on with network states, where you have people that are getting together that have a common interest, common ideology, and then forming communities, first virtual communities, and then going and looking to find actual sovereignty. And so this is an area I've been in. So do I have an answer? I don't have an answer. I have this is what I'm exploring, because this is what I think this is interesting. I think the idea of more decentralized states, where states are experimenting with different kinds of models, is it's something that I'm very curious about and I'm researching more. But it doesn't answer all of the questions of what do we do with what we have? What do we do with the debt that we have? What do we do with the existing nations? I mean, so it's certainly not there's no silver bullet there, but this is where at least my intellectual curiosity is going.
Right. Well, I'd like to humbly offer an opinion that you can find on my Substack.
Okay. What's your Substack?
It's a pretty unique opportunity where people themselves create the money supply. So there's no government. It's actually money represents productive, community-focused work that you've already done. So you perform labor, you get a receipt that becomes the new money. And so it's based on time. It's based on genuine output that benefits people other than yourself. So it has to be community focused. It has to be productive.
Yep.
Anyway, it's a totally radical different concept that A, people create the money themselves. B, that there's no debt involved, and there's a whole credit concept renewal.
Yeah. Well, what's your Substack?
Substack's my name, Don Findlay. Substack. Let me call it up and give you the right one. Gratitude. It's https://donfinlay.substack.com. And there's like the last 7-8 articles. I've really been diving into this, trying to get it out to a broader public.
Yep.
And like I said, I got introduced to monetary reform back in the 90s, 1990, and ventured off to Paul Hellier's cottage for a weekend, and he blew my mind. He had assembled people from the States and Canada. Paul Hellyer was the what do you call it? Vice Prime Minister in those days, whatever he was called, I forget. He also ran our Navy and Armed Forces. So it was a high level meeting with a lot of very clever minds. And since that time, I've been trying to live up to my commitment that before I die, I solve, what could this life have been like had we not been captive by the bankers and the usurers who put the chains on us with this debt-based system. So please have a look at it. And what we really need, I think, is, this opportunity to start from scratch again. Well, for God's sakes, let's dig into the fundamentals of what is money supposed to be, first of all, and how can we get it to serve everybody.
Yep. I agree. Well, I've signed up for your Substack, and I will take a look, because certainly one of the things that I did last year, I gave a talk on this to a group of people that I thought would be interested, and they weren't. And this was before the election, and my premise was, America has clearly fallen off the rails, and it's not just a matter of we've deviated from the Constitution, but there's a question of let's go back to first principles, and let's go back to the founding principles and what were the main ideas that they were debating even prior to codifying them in the Constitution. And I couldn't get people to engage in that. There was almost this, this was the U.S. system was the best system there could ever be, and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But then when you look at it, it's like, well, you know, we've already thrown out the Constitution, and I think we've already thrown out most of the founding principles. So have we not? I mean, maybe it's possible that in 250 years we have not learned anything fundamentally new that from a first principle perspective would change the outcome. I find that hard to believe, and that's why I've gotten really interested in these network states, and in particular a guy named Sterling Lujan, who writes about this. He has a great Substack as well. He speaks about these concepts all over the country, and he's working with a couple of organizations, one called Polis and another called God, I'm not remembering the name of it, but anyway, he's working on technology to help empower network states. And so I'm very, very excited about that.
Do you know of any networks that are operating on a time-based criteria for money?
I don't, and I know that a lot of these, I will say I'm very worried about technocracy, and honestly, some of the people that are working on these network states, I think, might actually end up implementing a technocracy after all. But I mean, I don't have to agree with the network state. I mean, part of the whole point of the network state is you're doing experimentation. You have a lot of different approaches, and
sure.
So, but not that I'm aware of. I mean, there's one in Singapore. There's one that Brian Johnson is working on, the guy does all of the biohacking. In fact, a lot of the network states that are forming are communities that are interested in solving a particular type of problem or other. So, but not that I'm aware of. But I'm going to check in with Sterling. I'm actually going to do an article on network states for Brownstone, just to give it just an introductory article, because most people aren't familiar with the concepts. Mm-hmm. But then Sterling is actually going around the world visiting these network states, and he's writing a book, which I've had him on my podcast before, and I'll have him on again, and I'm really looking forward to his book because he's living it. So he's actually going out and experiencing network states, and he's working on technology for network states, and then he has his own organization that is working on trying to help network states come up with best practices. Because if you think about it, most governance throughout human history has been, well, here's a family that had power. I mean, it was done by force. It wasn't, nobody was sitting down saying, well, hey, scientifically, this is the best way to approach. Here's the best practice for governance. Nothing was really generated from best practices. Most of it was generated from force. And so there's a lot of experimentation that can be done. I certainly don't have the answers, but and in fact, my outlook is that I don't think there is an answer. I'm more for more options, more choices.
Right. Yeah, well, I believe that the government has been taken over. We're no longer ruled by a democracy that puts the public interest first, the common public interest of the average working family, and it's it's difficult. I was born early enough that I lived through the time of exception, which I classify as the period between the end of the Second World War and about the mid-70s, where all boats were rising. The money, a good portion of the money here in Canada anyway, up to 20%, was created by our Bank of Canada, interest-free and loaned to the government. There was no inflation that resulted from it. Inflation was low during that period, and we built the infrastructure that sustained Canada and allowed us to grow. So all the roads and airports and hospitals and school systems, the only reason we could afford them was because they didn't come out of tax money and because they were financed interest-free. And today that's gone. We've completely lost it. Nobody even talks about it. They say, oh, well, the government can't just create money out of thin air because it'll be inflationary. Well, that's exactly what the banks do, is create money out of thin air. And then they make it worse by adding interest on top of it. So it's even more expensive.
Yep.
So, we really got to get back to fundamentals about who is money supposed to serve and who is the government supposed to serve. And what's the best way to get off this interest-bearing, debt-bearing trap and liberate people?
Well,
So
you ever hear of Ian Freeman? Can you guys hear me, or am I clear on my microphone?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So Ian Freeman was on the air 2010 talking about Bitcoin, and one of the biggest activists in the whole world. He had satellites in Africa, Asia, 200 radio stations across the United States, telling everyone, use Bitcoin, be your own bank, don't take part in your own oppression. And I think he had Bitcoin ATMs a few places in Concord. And so this guy is one of the best activists, but you see how they targeted him? And then there's another guy, Roger Ver, who comes out with this book, Hijacking Bitcoin. He gets arrested maybe 3 weeks after that in Spain. Now, these are some of the biggest activists in the whole world, targeting the central banks with some of the best information on like solutions on what to do. And it looks like they're just rounding these guys up, putting them in jail, making an example out of them. And so as far as solutions go, is there anyone better than Ian and Roger? That's the kind of question I'm wondering right now.
Well, this is what we're trying to build. This is what Daylight is trying to do. So this is part of my motivation for this is to literally go around the world teaching people how to do this. So onboarding merchants, onboarding individuals, building marketplaces, building gold-backed privacy coins. This is the whole purpose of what we're doing. But there isn't anyone better, and they were shut down for that reason. They were targeted because Biden signed an executive order that authorized a CBDC and also authorized a crackdown of crypto in the same executive order. And the reason for the crackdown on crypto was to remove competition. So the reason that people like Roger and people like Ian were targeted first is because they had been the most effective, and they were kind of the ground zero for the beginning of this. But we can all step up and do two things. One, we can try to get them out of prison and get them out of their situation, which is the best thing that we can do to help hyper accelerate adoption. And then the other thing that we can do is not be afraid of the chilling effect that the lawfare that they've experienced was intended to have. I've taken it as kind of a personal mission to say, okay, you want me to not engage in cryptocurrency, and you are putting these guys out there as an example to say, don't do cryptocurrency. So I guess given my personality, that emboldened me to say, you know what, I'm going to go around the country and teach people how to do this. So those are the two things that I can come up with. But I'll tell you, there are reasons. But it's been problematic, even for Ian and Roger. If you look at what's happened with that in the early days, I learned about crypto from Ian and Roger, but crypto's been hijacked. There are fewer people using crypto even before their legal problems. Because Bitcoin was hijacked and turned into this digital store of value narrative, people stopped using cryptocurrency. And so the problem is that when I go around trying to get people excited about doing this, there are a lot of people that ideologically originally signed up for crypto as something that you could use as an alternative to the central bank. And now they're kind of like joining the central banks. Now they're cheering on BlackRock. They're giving money to politicians so that the taxpayer theft is used to buy their Bitcoin or confiscated through civil asset forfeiture. So the problem is the people that should be our greatest allies are not. And now we have to go find new early adopters that weren't part of it originally, but they're there, and it's just it takes a lot of extra effort to find them, and a lot of extra effort to build tools that are easy enough to use where you can actually onboard them quickly enough and have retention. I see John Bush is here. Hey John, how are you? Can you hear me? There you go. I see John Bush, and you're not muted, so it looks like he's frozen. Oh wait, hold on a second. I guess he was on there twice. Hold on.
Hey.
Hey, there you go.
Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you now.
Cool. Hey, yeah, man, keep up the good work, Aaron. You're just absolutely crushing it on this front. And it really is a critical a critical space to be involved in. And I'm totally with you, because, you know, was in the crypto since 2012, 2013. I was at that Porkfest too, where Vitalik was walking around, and then Eric and Roger and Charlie were getting people onboarded. And it's wild how the space has changed so much, unfortunately. There are still, you know, the cadre of agorists and anarchists that are wanting to create a parallel economy, but a lot of the momentum kind of got shifted into the number go up. But it is really challenging too, and it's easy. People think that we're just going to be able to spin up all these alternatives out of nowhere if we need to, when the pure need arises. But as you point out, the need is already there. And it does take like boots on the ground activism to identify merchants and to go talk to those businesses, and to accept crypto in your own business, right? It's not the easiest thing to get someone set up and onboarded. I would encourage people, as far as activism goes, to like let's identify core needs before wants. And a big one is food, of course. So like a great piece of activism would be to identify local food producers or people that sell food that you know of, and see if you can get them set up on Monero. I know there's like the Beef Initiative. They're all into Bitcoin and the Lightning Network and stuff, which is better than nothing, at least. But I think we need to get more people onboarded to Monero and try to use it as much as we can. But it's not easy. It takes work. I honestly don't think that we'll be able to get the mass adoption. I think that we may already be strategically beat on that front, but we definitely have a whole lot of people that are agorists, that see through the lies and the deception. And I think it's important that we organize amongst ourselves, start trading amongst ourselves. The education piece is important.
Well, I think we can get mass adoption after we get innovator adoption and early adopter adoption. What's frustrating about this is we're 16 years in and we actually now have to go back to innovator, and that's unusual, and that's the challenge. But I agree with you 100% about the going after the needs. You know, in other words, one of the things I think we need is a marketplace, but that's not Silk Road for drugs, but that's Silk Road for, you know, the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So food and health and all of the other things, that's user friendly. And I've added that to the list of something that you could build on Zano. I mean, with escrow accounts and everything else, one of the things that is powerful, but we still need some of the tech development to happen is, you know, confidential layer will allow you to take your Bitcoin and Ethereum and Bitcoin Cash and make it private, and then you're going to be able to spend. Then imagine if you could spend your private versions of those currencies in marketplaces and through merchants that accept the bridged private versions of those assets. And so there's kind of a roadmap developing, but you know, and Dan, I think to your point, the barrier here is we've got to connect the dots and have easy to use solutions for merchants and for consumers. And I think with Roger and Ian as well, I mean, they've run into those problems. I know Roger's always been an advocate. He's invested in all kinds of different BitPay, payment processors. It's funny, I just saw a thing today that I liked that somehow came up in my feed from February of last year. It's some touch to pay thing, and there was a video of Roger testing. I think it's called Ubit. I've never used it, but I saw there was a video I liked from February of last year. But we haven't cracked the code yet. Right, people are using Venmo. People are using they're using these stable coins, and so it is all about UI. And there is somewhat of a within the privacy community. There's almost a cohesion around. Well, you know, we are cool. We're kind of outcasts, and so having it be hard is kind of like part of the cost of entry to being in the club. I'm not saying the whole thing is like that, but there is an element of that, and we've got to get around that if we want to have reasonable adoption.
Do you think that the AnyPay guys might consider coming back to the United States?
I don't know why they would, because everybody that has been targeted under Biden lawfare criminally is still suffering. There's been no relief In fact, I mean, we talked about this 2 days ago. So, and it's actually part of this whole talk today. So Trump had said, we're going to be crypto, we're going to be Bitcoin. Well, what has he done so far? He started a Bitcoin strategic reserve based on civil asset forfeiture, which is theft. And he's promoted stable coins, which are backdoor CBDCs. They've given relief to people that were sued under Biden by the SEC in prioritization based on the amount of money you donated to Trump's campaign. So I don't know why anybody would come back to the United States or would build something here if you are concerned about privacy and building peer-to-peer cash, because this administration has not indicated any interest in those things. Furthermore, they've made it so that meme coins are legal, but you still can't invest in a company. You can't buy equity. You still have to be a high net worth individual. You still have to pay tens of thousands of dollars of legal fees. It's still true that unless you're wealthy and unless you can work through the existing process, so you can't, you have to be protected from investing in Amazon or an AI startup, but you can put all of the money you want in meme coins that are by definition Ponzi schemes. So, I don't know. I think something would actually have to change before they would consider that.
Yeah, the question also is like, what is the value backing all of this stuff up? It's in most cases it's $1. Some cases it's gold, but gold is a cyclical reference to dollar. Gold's value is determined in dollars, and dollars are determined by the amount of gold. So it's like the cat chasing its tail. They're both dependent, interdependent, and the same thing. So what's the value of $1? What's the value of a yen? What's it based on? It's a notion in motion. It's not tied to anything in reality. So
well, there is no intrinsic value. I mean, things are always priced based on, what the market thinks something is worth. Not
exactly.
So,
so is that the best that humanity can come up with? That we'll just let the market decide? And what's the market decision based on? It's based on what's best for me, the most I can squeeze out of somebody.
The market's based on a collectively, it's based on people dealing in their own self-interest. The problem is the reverse of that is technocracy, where people think that they can actually design something for everyone, and that usually turns out to be much worse than markets. I've yet to see an example of where people have out-engineered the market.
Yeah,
I know that Ernest Hancock calls it catalactics. Things are worth exactly what they're worth.
Yep. So that's true. So I don't know what, again, there's a lot that there are so many things changing. The impact of AI, I think, is not fully well appreciated or understood. And it could be a great thing or it could be a bad thing. I think for me, most of these things tend to break down the lines of decentralization versus centralization and freedom versus tyranny. I think that those are generally the big dimensions. And so I like some of the decentralized AI, but I don't think people understand how profoundly AI is going to impact things. And usually people immediately get into this mode of, oh, well, this is going to replace me. It's going to be horrible. But usually that turns out not to be the case. Usually technology, just because you can't think of the new opportunities that are created by a new enabling technology doesn't mean they exist. And usually they're more numerous. But it depends on how the technology is rolled out. But I looked at this thing today. One of the things, they're agents. Let me see if I can find the newest one. It was excuse me, a Chinese company called Manus, and it's a general AI agent. And you basically type in what you want, and it will continue to iterate and go through the process, and not just give you back output of what you should do. It will actually do it. So you can tell it to build a website and that solves A, B, and C problem, and it will figure out how to solve the problem, and then it'll actually figure out the website, and then it'll actually configure the website. And so the next level of AI are going to be agents, and you're going to have agents talking to each other. There's a lot of things going on, and there are implications for this because there are, you know, substantial productivity enhancements that come from this, and there is a real question of at what point. So much of economics and so much things is based on the idea of scarcity. A lot of scarcity is manufactured, but there's a certain level of, once you get to a level of technological sophistication where we do kind of move from scarcity to abundance. And I don't know what the answers are to any of that. And there are a lot of problems related to all of it as well. So there's a lot of murky stuff ahead, but it is fascinating to see what's going on in AI.
Totally.
As with crypto.
Totally. And the other thing that's important is who gets to design what's in AI. What are the parameters of knowledge that are allowed to be included? That's very important.
Well, this is, again, where I think the market is the best solution for this, and decentralization is the solution for this, because the last thing that I would want are the elected blackmailed people in Congress determining that. Those are the least effective people at doing this. The central
WEF and those the corporate crowd are just as bad, though, or worse. In fact, they're indistinguishable now.
Well, some of them are indistinguishable, but it depends on what you're using, because I can use Venice AI, or I can use Mike Adams Health Ranger is releasing his. It's kind of like with crypto. Yeah, there really aren't good venture capital backed corporate crypto projects, but there are numerous crypto projects that are fantastic and that are very innovative, like Monero and Zeno and others. They're not corporate, but they're certainly not government, and they are very decentralized, and they're open source projects. And so the top down thing is again, to me, more worrisome, because then you end up with a situation where you're picking experts, and the whole expert thing has turned out to be a fallacy.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, so again, I think with AI, the decentralized approach is great. The reverse of that is terrifying. OpenAI, Anthropic, Google's AI. But of course, you know, the funny thing is, I'm old enough to remember doing startups when Silicon Valley used to be kind of libertarian leaning. And I've actually talked to some people about this. I mean, there was a time, you know, actually even in the 80s where, well, I mean, California didn't turn into a completely blue woke state until after the 80s. And some of the original VCs there are unrecognizable compared to the people that are there now. But it gradually drifted. And some of that drift, and a lot of people don't know this, is because a lot of the venture capital firms get their money from public sources of funding, and the public sources of funding actually have ties and strings attached. So a lot of the VCs are even in California because the largest investor in venture capital firms is the California pension system itself. And they'll say, well, we'll give your venture capital firm $100 million, but you have to only invest in companies that are within this radius of whatever, San Francisco or LA or within California, and you have to meet these social guidelines. Well, none of that was actually the case. That wasn't how this worked, you know, going back to the 80s. And so now we have a situation where what we call venture capital is actually mostly owned by public pension funds and university endowments, which I would argue is not really very capitalist.
Hey, Aaron, I got a question about mRNA vaccines with AI technology and Palantir, and $40 billion passed on the first day of the Trump administration. Do you know anything about this technology, what it does, and its relationship to Palantir?
I don't. I actually haven't heard that one. I think the thing that I heard that was even more terrifying than that was the $500 billion Operation Stargate project, which is Softgate, Oracle, and OpenAI. And Larry Ellison from Oracle, in the press release, talked about how one of the uses of the $500 billion investment was going to be to apply AI to mRNA technology. But I wasn't familiar with this Palantir piece. I'm not surprised, but I don't know anything about it.
I might be wrong about the Palantir piece. but I think the $40 billion mRNA AI, it might be behind Palantir. I don't know who else would be behind it. I know Palantir is, aren't they a military AI company?
Yeah, I mean they are an AI company that they work with the CIA, they work with law enforcement agencies around the United States. I mean, they're getting to the point where they're working on, tech that involved with like pre-crime systems. Actually, their CEO is a guy named Alex Karp. He lives in New Hampshire, and one of the other things that's happened, and I had in the presentation, I talked about the PayPal mafia and the impact that the PayPal mafia has on the Trump administration. The PayPal mafia, all of the people that were associated with PayPal are Elon Musk. I mean, there's like a dozen of them, but Elon Musk and David Sachs and Peter Thiel are the three big ones, and they have massive influence. The only reason J.D. Vance is the vice president is because of Peter Thiel. Even Hulk Hogan being at the Republican National Convention and doing that speech, Peter Thiel bankrolled Hulk Hogan. Peter Thiel was outed as being gay by Gawker magazine, and Peter Thiel was so pissed off about it that he funded a lawsuit where there was a sex tape released by Gawker involving Hulk Hogan. And so Peter Thiel, behind the scenes, funded the lawsuit to bankrupt Gawker and was successful at it. So Peter Thiel is so wired in behind the scenes that people have no idea how much influence there is there. But in addition to Palantir, there's an association of like 6 different AI companies that got together at the beginning of the year and decided that they're going to start competing and bidding as a group for Defense Department contracts to compete with Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, and all of the other companies. And so it's really insidious, and it's pretty frightening, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of like a lot of these sci-fi movies, like the Terminator, the Matrix. It seems like they had the year 2029 in a lot of these, but it's kind of scary how real life is shaping up to be like a sci-fi movie sometimes.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, one of the rabbit holes to go down is to look at robot technology. And there are now competing, Musk says, I think within the next 2 years, they're going to be like 1 billion robots or something. I can't remember what all that was, but you actually look at these. Boston Dynamics has been showing the evolution of their robots. And now it's gotten to the point where there was one that I saw last week that mimics in fact, I think it's called Clone, where somehow you're involved in the creation process and it actually maps to all of our bones and muscles, and like it imitates the other person. And there's Anduril, there's Tesla robots, and Google also is working on a robot, and then they're tying these things into like OpenAI and Grok. And I've seen some of these examples where they're getting intricate. I mean, they can do dishes, but then they actually have fine capability to be able to like pick up a grape without bursting the grape. And so, so this could go either really well or really bad. I actually, one of the funny things is there's a whole theme that seems to be that a lot of people that I know, they're like doomers, where their assumption is, well, we got to go to Little House. It's all about survival. It's all about Little House on the Prairie. I've got to grow my own food. That's the direction it's headed in. And I feel like, okay, well, that's one approach, but I could also see, you could program a robot with best practices for farming and have the robot do the farming. I mean, is the essence of humanity that we should spend 90% of our time on subsistence? Is that the maximum expression of free will? I don't think so. But certainly technocracy is the negation of free will, because once you have scientists and engineers and central planners making decisions for you, then you actually are not exercising your free will. You are following a control system and like a social credit system. So that's where that line between freedom and tyranny comes into play with AI, with digital currencies, and with tech in general.
Yeah, it's getting very dangerous. Dangerous. I don't know what's your take on the chance or likelihood or wisdom of considering a third way. Like, it's always been either capitalism or communism. That's it. And under the communism you have, socialism, and under capitalism you can even go as far as fascism and technocracy. And but it's always those two polars, north south. You got to choose one or the other. At the ballot, political parties have lined up in the same framework, so that you got to choose one or the other. What if there was another one? What if we introduced a third pole that had neither capitalism or communism? Was individualism and localism, and bringing back the idea that individuals are born sovereign by given that gift from creation. They don't have to borrow it from government or claim it from government. It's theirs by birth, and they should be the supreme authority over their lives, not everybody's lives, and they don't have the authority to tell anybody else what to do, but they have the supreme authority over their own life. And you take that and you broaden that by going locally into your environment and your municipal structure, and making that the next tier down from. So individualism is supremacy, and no one has the right to tell you what you must do or how you must live or what you must inject into your body or any of that crap. And then from there, the next level is local, municipality level, where you can actually reach the people that are around you physically and face to face, and make decisions at that level, and basically usurp the power of federal governments and provincial governments, and fold them all into a local administration, and get rid of most of government. I believe that the answer is neither government nor corporate, but it's basically consumer, it's individual rule, which free markets were supposed to be, but we never had free markets beyond, the first, until Rockefeller introduced his ideas, and we lost it in the early 1900s. But that's the most viable, fair way to get along peacefully and sociably, because capitalism and communism are certainly not social. They're antisocial.
I mean, I don't know if actual free market capitalism is antisocial, but I will say this. I spoke at the G. Edward Griffin's Red Pill Expo, and he gave a talk on. He's been working on a project to push kind of what you're talking about, to push for localism and to get people involved at the town level. And I'm in New Hampshire. I'm part of the Free State Project. I've gotten involved in politics at every level, ranging from running for school board to running PACs to running for president. Like, it's been a wide spectrum. And the conclusion that I've come to is that this localism approach, it might work, but it's probably not going to work unless you have like-minded people. And I think what you find is that I know a lot of the people that are in localism find themselves in the situation where they're outnumbered 9-1 politically. And so this is why I like the idea of network states, because I actually think that you need to find your people that are ideologically aligned in order to find a place to have some form of localism.
The problem with localism is it's dependent on provincial and federalism in order to exist. And that is defined in people's minds what's realistic, what's possible, and should I support this? Is it realistic? Is it possible? Or is it, a waste of time? So you have to change the concept of federal and provincial as well, or state. And then local becomes the most efficient way to administer directly to the people in that locality.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I think that again, there are experiments like this. There's Liberland, which I don't think I'm going to be able to speak at it, but there's Liberland, and there are some projects. There's some stuff going on in Honduras. There are some places. I mean, I would argue in the United States that your best shot at this would be in New Hampshire if you got a group of people together. I mean, there are some towns that are small enough. For whatever reason, the Free State Project hasn't done this. Most people live in these big towns where they're outnumbered politically. So most of the hardcore political activists are in towns where they lose almost every election. Occasionally they'll win one, but they won't have control of a school board, or they won't have control of a of a town council. But there are some towns that are small enough that you could move 500 people, 1,000 people, and you could actually have a pretty good run of it. But again, to me, it's all experimentation. A lot of this is, thinking outside of the box. And so many people think narrowly about, they don't think about anything outside of the country they were born in, and they don't know anything about it. Like, there's so many people in America that think that America is the freest country in the world and all this other stuff. And I'm telling you, they clearly haven't traveled. There's a lot of stuff going on in Mexico. There are a lot of intentional communities and kind of different political structures that are kind of running on their own outside of the existing structure. I'm not saying that Mexico's ideal for a whole variety of other reasons, but there are pockets of things. In fact, there are probably more of what we would call network states that have been around for a long time, just not on a blockchain, that nobody talks about because they're actually just self-sufficiently running on their own and probably want to be left alone and not have their story publicized. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, the problem is they're still dependent or confined by the money system, all these federal, national, and international barriers that are set up, that are the control grid, that are the money system, that are the decision makers, the Googles and the Apples and the government and the military and all that crap. With that framework in place, there's very little room for, individual or local freedom. So my idea is that you have to, like, the best tool, if the problem is a national, international problem, which it is, because we've been brainwashed into thinking about what money is and how what politics is and what government is, and we've been propagandized all through our lives into thinking this is the way, this is reality, this is how it works, and you're an idiot if you think otherwise. So until you get to that core, if that's the root of the problem, then the root of the solution has to be to go to that core and say, okay, this is wrong. We need to rethink the whole bloody thing. And now I would have said right up until 5 years ago that this is impossible. This is impossible. We're too entrenched in our way of thinking. But COVID brought up so much new awareness of how unjust, unfair, how, like George Carlin says, it's a big club and we ain't in it. Like, most people would never have heard that or understood what that means. But since COVID, like, millions of people have woken up. And so now might be the opportunity to actually go into that big question and say, okay, look, is what we've been told in history and what we've been told in tradition and all that really the best way that we can live as a species? Is it even sustainable enough for our species to continue on the path that we're going? And, come up with a better system and get everybody to think seriously about it. And that's the problem I've found from surveying people and starting up groups and, doing on the ground action, is that you can start an idea and you get some early adopters and it starts to grow. But then growing beyond that, you hit this hurdle of, well, most people just, they can't think about stuff like that. They're too busy in their lives, or it's too big for them to think about.
Yeah, I've been talking about this since about 2019, and it actually started when I got involved with this blockchain project called Ravencoin. I don't know if you're familiar with Patrick Byrne. He was the CEO of Overstock, and his idea, he was one of the first retailers to take Bitcoin through Overstock, and he was going to pivot the entire company. He was going to sell the e-commerce business and go all into blockchain, but not I'm going to buy a bunch of Bitcoin and hold it. But he viewed blockchain technology as a way to create a blockchain tech stack for human civilization. So you could apply blockchain to voting, supply chain, capital markets, all of the kind of the fundamental pillars of society, but that become corrupted by third parties. And so by having kind of a transparent blockchain, you could get rid of those third parties and then perhaps rebuild civilization. So I've been talking about this, working on like technologies and everything else. And to your point, I can tell you there are not many people that want to talk about this. And there are people that I would think that are kind of on the cutting edge that would want to talk about this. And people are really, really entrenched in preserving the existing systems. And they do not want to go out of their comfort zone into thinking about, oh, well, what if this breaks down, or if this system, it's like, well, we've got to restore the republic. We've got to fix
I think we need a good video or series of videos or, presentations that actually, some of the best documentaries, like Big Picture Company, cinema qualities, professional quality videos that portray what life could be like if we got rid of, say, debt and interest and government and taxation. We don't need any of that bullshit. If we empower people to trade fairly amongst themselves, it will be a huge transformation that will be immediately interesting to everybody.
Well, I will tell you where I'm actually pulling it up right now. This was from February 22 of last year. And so there are kind of two issues with this. So one of the things that I realized is, and this is the challenge that we have when we're essentially competing with technocracy, because technocracy doesn't allow for other systems to coexist alongside it. When you look at the WEF and the UN Agenda 2030, it's actually about controlling and regulating all assets and everything on Earth. The land, the air, the sea, everything on it is centrally controlled. So part of how I even got into this fighting the CBDC issue is I realized that unless we actually remove enough energy from that system, because that is their control point, then they're just going to dominate whatever else.
They're going to kill us.
But then where I got with it was I went down this first principles thing, and kind of, all right, so my idea was there's some things that I like that I always go back to that I found to be really fascinating. I liked watching like a decent debate, like William F. Buckley versus Gore Vidal or something like that. But then there was something that Milton Friedman did. He had that series, Free to Choose. And what he would do is he would do these things where he would present something, a video, like he had that iPencil video to show everything that was involved in that. And so he'd do his presentation, and then he would have a panel of people that would discuss that didn't agree with him necessarily from all sides of it to actually critique and have a conversation about what he was doing, an actual thoughtful conversation. In some ways, this is how I've structured this. I haven't figured out how to do it, like to have people come up and do this kind of like interchange that we're having right now after I present something like I just presented. But that's the model, because I always thought that was a really fascinating approach of, all right, well, here's my thing, but then let's have an open discussion about it, and then let's let other people do this. And so I thought, all right, well, I don't know the answers. In fact, and I don't even my goal isn't to create a single answer. I don't even think that again, the technocrats want one solution. I like the idea of there are millions of different solutions. I don't necessarily want to think that I'm going to find the best one and that should be enforced on anyone. But what I thought about was the idea of actually creating a website where you would actually take first principles and you would have people debate on those first principles. So you'd take some concepts like liberty, equality, republicanism, federalism, limited government, rule of law, in your case, capitalism, communism, actually, and have people on different sides debate those things. And where people, so people could watch the debate, then they could participate online on the debate. You could even rate where, I like this idea of, so often we have these debates. There was one debate that was just incredible. It was Christopher Hitchens and this other guy versus the Catholic Church. I can't believe I'm not remembering his name. He's a comedian, Stephen Fry. So it was Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens versus some people from the Catholic Church. And it was like, and the question that was posed was, is the Catholic Church a force of good for the world or not? And they debated for like 3 hours, but like it was an incredible debate, first of all, back and forth. And then the crowd at the end, they voted at the beginning as to what they thought, and then they voted at the end to see how their opinion changed. And I thought, you know what would be interesting is, what if you had these debates where, let's say you had a debate on capital, you had not just one debate on capitalism, you had a series of debates on capitalism, and where people could actually change their opinion over a long period of time after seeing multiple debates. Because everything that we do right now is like this snapshot. And so many of debates are style points, or it's like, I've got zingers, like political debates are now useless. But what if you could actually have a thoughtful debate that turned into a conversation that was kind of a rolling thing? Anyway, needless to say, this idea did not find, has not found any interest yet. But part of the reason I want to do it is because I don't want to impose. I really don't know.
No.
Part of the problem is, so right now, right, you said a lot of people woke up because of COVID. I would say that they've maybe opened an eyelid, but one of the things that is and I guess I consider myself lucky. I didn't consider it at the time, but I kind of, most people wake up because they've gone through a crisis or two.
Absolutely.
And I had the opportunity to go through three, and I went through a major one right before COVID. And so I went through this whole process of, everything that I believe is bullshit. I've been lied to about everything. And then when you let all that go and forgive yourself for being fooled, then you're like opening up to exploring all of these new things that you've never considered before. And right now, I feel like we're at this point where with COVID, people are saying, I think that this is probably the mainstream of people that are recently awake, is that something bad happened during COVID, but there's a restore point prior to COVID. Like if we could just go back to where things were before 2019, because the bad things happened in 2020, not realizing that it's fundamentally flawed and it's much deeper than that. And it's hard to get people to cross that, which is why I think this idea that I've had trying to get people to talk about first principles, the reaction that I've gotten to it is it's been a lot of, well, the Constitution is the best thing. We don't want to throw the baby out. Let's support RFK. Let's support these politicians. This is the way forward. And this is from people that you would think we're on kind of the cutting edge of this stuff. And where I came out with it is nothing is mainstream. Everything starts with innovators like 2.5%. So just focus on the 2.5%. Don't worry even about the mainstream, because if you were the mainstream is controlled by gatekeepers who are people that, if you've probably noticed this, these are not exactly.
The problem is the mainstream, and all the solutions have to deal with the mainstream, or else they won't get anything other than small little communities isolated that will be run over, absolutely run over, and nobody will participate in from the mass majority. You can't ignore the mainstream. The mainstream is what has to be fixed.
But the way mainstream gets fixed, it's like this with products, companies, and ideas. So it's kind of like we were talking about crypto. So the issue with crypto is, okay, early adopters, innovators, if you use the technology and then you make it user-friendly and easy to use, then you can go mainstream. But nothing ever starts mainstream. So there's a sequence to it. And the sequence is never start mainstream. So to me, why I like network states is it's almost impossible. Once people are debating ideas, then it's all speculative. because it could be, well, I came up with this idea, but this idea is bullshit or it's untested. I don't have any proof of it. But if I actually try something on a small scale and I actually get a proof of concept, if there's a network state and I can show you what it's like, then now there's something where it's like, okay, well, do you want a 15-minute city or do you want this, but I'm actually showing you something that exists as opposed to talking to you about something that's abstract? Because thanks to our buddy Rockefeller, people have been conditioned to not think abstractly. They're better at being kind of machines. So anyway.
So in that debate, did the opinions of people change from the beginning to the end when they did the second vote?
Yes. Yeah. It was actually.
It was a shift.
It was a major shift, which, by the way, I've been in other debates where they've tried that, and usually it's no shift. This was a definitive shift. This was actually I would not want to debate against Christopher Hitchens or Stephen Fry either. I like Christopher Hitchens has a way with words, but it was a definitive shift.
Cool.
And so I actually find myself just, this is kind of nerd that I am. I actually look for those kinds of debates. Like I guess Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley weren't great debates. Some of them actually turned into a little bit of slop, but we don't have debates or even discussions anymore. We have no format for it. It's people with talking points.
I like the debate that Donald Trump just had with Justin Trudeau. He said that he's going to let Canada sing their national anthem after they agree to become the 51st state. And then he told Greenland that he's taking their whole country, and that's it. They're not going to get anything for it. So I just asked Grok, what is this all about? So Grok said there's a rare earth mineral called neodymium, which is essential for electric motors and AI technology. And it's located in Greenland.
Yep.
So interesting.
Yeah, no, that was always there are a lot of rare earth minerals in Greenland. That is all Greenland is about. I can only imagine what Gaza has.
Trump is technocracy in motion. He's the Trump card of technocracy, I'm afraid.
He is, and I'll tell you, it's really hard to convince people of this. And now I feel, Dan knows this. Dan worked with me on helping to put together some of these workshops and everything. And we had a lot of interest, and people were actually focused on this issue. And then a lot of people have put all of their faith in these white knights, whether it's Trump or Elon or the combination of the two. And this is why I wanted to do this presentation today and this article, which is that just it's factually there in black and white what's going on. Look, you can tell what Trump has said. He wants the dollar to be the global reserve currency. He's doing this stuff with tariffs. They don't want transparency. They want his Treasury Secretary has said that it needs to be compliant. It needs to be trackable. His Treasury Secretary is already increasing reporting requirements on these 30 zip codes. It's not a speculation as to where this is going. It's actively going there.
Sure it is.
And then there's actual bills that have just passed committees that have been drafted. They didn't just draft these things. The original drafting of this thing was 2023, and the direction of it has never been towards the direction of individual rights or privacy or anything related to the Constitution. It's all been about the way I look at Trump is, his mentor was that lawyer, I can't remember his name, Roy Cohn, who was a mob lawyer for I think all five of the mob families, and then he was involved with a whole variety of he worked with Joe McCarthy. Interestingly, he died of AIDS and was gay, but then he actually worked for causes that were anti-gay and anti-AIDS. And so this was Trump's mentor. And so Trump kind of he's running this stuff like a technocratic mob boss.
Yeah. Somebody called him a billionaire playboy takes the most powerful job on the planet. Billionaire playboy. Yeah. And I don't think he's himself. I don't think he's super intelligent. In fact, I don't think he's very intelligent. He's smart business sense wise, but I don't know. He might be.
Well, you know what I'm hoping with Trump is, I'm not a Trumper or anything like that, but I'm just hoping that, he's a businessman. He's an ego guy. He's the biggest actor in the whole world. He had that show that was the #1 rated show. So I'm thinking maybe from an ego point of view, he's just really pissed off at all these people that just happen to be, tyrants and authoritarians and everything else. And maybe he's just after all these people, maybe not for the right reasons, but it's not, it's never going to end well because, like what Aaron said, the technocracy is coming here. It's just a sideshow, a lot of this stuff, but that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, it's here. That's for sure. Like Aaron says, it's here. It's not coming. It's being rolled out every day.
Yeah, it is at rapid speed. I mean, Trump's talked about 15 new AI cities, which, okay, is this a 15-minute city? The tie-in with Greenland and everything else. Yeah, no, it's tough, and people are stuck within that system. So now they're like, well, you've got to work within the system. This is the only way you can do it. And look, the problem is I've spent 30 years in politics. I know you can't work within the system. So there are a lot of people that are new to politics. And this is true of a lot of the Maha people. There are a lot of the Maha people that are very well-intentioned, have been very passionate, but don't know how politics work. So they actually have no idea that they're just about to get completely chewed up.
Yeah.
And I said on the podcast a couple of days ago, if you've ever seen the show Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister, I should probably put in some clips. There standard excuses that this Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister show is a show in the UK. There was a battle between the administrative state and the elected officials, and with really good banter back and forth. Kind of this was England pre whatever's going on in the last 20 years or 30 years, but the dialogue is completely relevant to everything that's going on right now. And so you can see the excuses. I mean, we've already moved beyond like Maha. So I said, so here are the top 10 excuses for why things won't happen, right? So why they're not going to do anything on vaccines, they're not going to do anything. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither are lasting solutions. We're laying the groundwork for future success. These things take time to get right. We're navigating unprecedented challenges. The system wasn't designed for quick fixes. We need bipartisan support to move forward. We're prioritizing long-term stability over short-term wins. The complexity of the issue requires careful study. Budget constraints limit what we can do right now. Change is a marathon, not a sprint. We're already seeing that, even with these Epstein files. The Epstein files, I had a separate list before they even said they were going to put out the list, and it's already happened. We already got the redaction for national security, and now the next thing that they're going to do is they're saying, well, these are now active investigations. So they're going to redact more of the information, and they're never going to give it to us because they're going to claim it's ongoing, and they'll never actually pursue it. So it
even exists anymore. They may have got rid of it all. Daily they're destroying literally millions and probably billions of documents and emails through the government. All the health industry, the what do you call it? The trade ministry. Everybody is destroying documents because it's been so corrupt, and they don't want to get caught. They don't want it public.
Yep. Yeah, and so that's the state of things. So when people are like, oh, this is our last chance to save this, I always like, so what is the path to success like? What is it that they could actually possibly do? And the other part of the problem is that a lot of these well-intentioned people think that we actually have a constitution, and we haven't had a constitution for a long time. And the administrative state and the people at the top of government do not follow the same rules. So they also believe that we have a constitution that applies. Well, what we don't. So if you play by a set of rules that the other people are not playing by, then you're not going to win. And that is essentially what's happening right now.
Right. Well, a big part of the problem is the information control, and that's how they got us into this mess in the first place. And if we can't crack that one, but certainly in politics would change dramatically if political financing changed, and if political financing was controlled so that political parties couldn't just solicit unlimited capital and spend and propagandize the whole nation and control television, radio, command people's attention and public opinion. You could easily control that by simply passing a law that says, okay, as a responsibility for us, a nation, granting a license to a TV or radio station or an information provider, that during an election you will provide free of charge equal time for all the candidates, and in combination with that, limit the amount of first of all, no corporate funding at all. Nobody except individuals are allowed to contribute in any way to any kind of campaign, and set a limit on how much they're allowed to go. Now suddenly the whole power of money is no longer influencing what people get to hear, and encourages other people who really right now don't have the money. They have the ideas, but they don't have the money to even contemplate.
I think in '92 there was Ross Perot, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. He was a billionaire that just wanted to have like a white chalkboard and explain to everybody that they're all getting screwed by inflation and the Federal Reserve and whatever else. And apparently he even had enough money to rent like NBC News from like 8 to 9 o'clock at night, like once or twice a week. So after that happened, I guess they banned this from ever happening again. And now there's no more debates, and no third parties are allowed, and the elections are fairly rigged. But
right.
I hope I don't sound too conspiratorial here, though. But
well, all that stuff has to be brought under control. The government should serve the public interest. That's what it was intended with the Constitution. Partially, more so then, never 100%. It was certain individuals' points of view and ideas were more important than the common public. But generally speaking, government was supposed to look after its citizens, not look after it, but treat their citizens fairly and create opportunity for them. But that's all gone aside now. It's only the moneyed people that are important, and public policy is not necessarily anything to do with public opinion. And controlling public opinion is essential to get away with what they're doing. So we got to break that. We've got to break. Can't do it all the time, but you can certainly do it during an election by controlling the propaganda that goes out about the candidates and encouraging new candidates to come in.
Yeah, I mean, that won't work. I mean, there is still a free speech issue, and then there's the fact that at this point, I shouldn't need a license to create a social media platform. What if I create a decentralized media platform? Do I have to get a license for that? I don't think that you can regulate that level of reach. And by the way, you'd end up with part of the issue with this ends up becoming, even in examples, because there's a public funding option, but you still have to meet minimum thresholds. You still have to raise a certain amount of money. You still have to pull in a certain way, because otherwise you could have a situation where you have 1 million people running for political office. If you had to give 1 million people the same access, then actually nobody would get any information. But all that aside, I think that there's one of the big issues. I'm reading this book now, The Breakdown of Nations, and I've seen this in corporations as well. The idea of a country with 330 million people is unworkable. I think the number is like 100. After 140 people, you kind of start to begin to have breakdown. And so, to me, the idea of righting the ship, or even the idea of having a political entity with 330 million people is unworkable to begin with. But one of the reasons I think we can't fix the situation that we're in right now, and this is when I was talking about foundational principles as opposed to like the Constitution itself, the whole thing was based on the idea that you would have an educated population. The average voter now something like 71% of Americans can't identify the 3 branches of government. If you look at the civics test scores of 8th graders, I think only 28% pass. So it's one of those things where it's like we have people, and you see some of these people embodied, like a guy will go to the beach or go down the street and start interviewing people and asking them questions, and people don't know who the president is, people don't know who the vice president is, but that's not the standard for it, even based on like civics tests. Like I don't know how you fix that, because we literally have what I call no to low information voters. And when I spend a lot of time doing political activism, I'll tell you how bad this is. Because you can get into, well, there's debates and giving people airtime, but what about doing mailers? So now if you're running a super PAC or you're one of these political parties, and Obama was really the one who paved the way and started leading for this, they have like thousands of data points on every voter. So they know what magazine subscriptions you have. They have like lists of issues, 100 issues, and where you stand on this. And they could do targeted social media posts. They can hire influencers. They have, even programs to try to get, influence your next door neighbors to influence you. The amount of, and the sophistication using data and AI in elections right now, it's so programmed in. I don't even know how you unwind that, but it's really bad. If people knew that, because I've done this, I had a super PAC and I licensed one of these databases for the state of New Hampshire, and I had all this data on every citizen in the state, and people have no idea that this stuff exists, and it's not that expensive, and most political campaigns have it.
Yeah, and they've even talked about, well, we don't even need elections because we can predict with AI how people will vote, and it's just a waste of money. So there you go. That's where we're heading, man.
Palantir's all over that. Pre-voting.
Well, that's part of the control. People don't know what's going on because they're not exposed to it. They're exposed to entertainment and sports and, superstars and fear and CSI and, the worst entertainment to pollute their minds and make them fearful and succumb to government authority. That's what they're exposed to. And so it kills your creativity. It kills your purpose of life. And of course, the school systems and the universities now, they certainly don't encourage debate or controversy or independent research at all, really. So it's no wonder. But we've got to get to the people on the street. And the only way to get to them is to control that bloody mainstream media. I don't know. It's a huge problem.
Oh, it's a huge problem. This is why I go back to, if we can start getting some proof points with network states, then we can show people not one alternative, because it is like, so, I mean, this is the problem. Like, I will say, when I went through my, whatever you want to call it, midlife crisis or whatever, pre-COVID, there really is that understanding that, there's what there's what you don't know, and there's what you don't know you don't know. And the what you don't know is the largest part of it. And so if you're able to let go of what you think as being what defines everything, then you can really explore a bunch of these alternatives. This is one of the problems. So I've been in the Liberty community, and I don't know what ANCAP, whatever you want to call it. I've been in this community for a long time, and one of the challenges is that you have the WEF presenting 15-minute cities, and what we're offering ideologically is literally unlimited potential. It's literally whatever you could imagine is the potential, but people would rather have the 15-minute city than think about what's possible, or even have the framework to think about infinite possibilities.
Well, it's defined more clearly for them. Our problem is we can't define clearly what it is we're talking about, and we can't present it in a way that captures this 15-second.
Well, I would say that it is infinite potential. Is what we're offering? It is that vast, but
people don't know what that means. So you got to show them some concrete examples. I did a survey study just in Canada here, just out of curiosity, and I took our GDP and and found out that the number of hours of work, labor, physical labor, like on payrolls, that it takes to generate that GDP. And I divided the GDP by the amount of work hours that went into it. And on that basis, if you value, and you can, it doesn't matter what the GDP is, we produced it collectively by our labor, our society-wide labor. You know what the average income would be if we divided it evenly? It's over $100,000. It's about, in Canada, it's about $120,000. So that's the kind of thing that should be, like most people, if you check Stats Canada, 90% of the population, over 90% of the population in Canada makes less than that. So there's a clear advantage, a clear benefit to people to, if they believe that it's possible, and that's the touchstone right there. You have to show them that it is possible. But if you could get them to believe, why would they be against it? You would have a super majority if you ran a political campaign that said, we're gonna pay you, you're gonna pay yourself by doing productive work for society, and you're gonna have the equivalent of over $100,000 reward for doing it. Nobody's gonna tell you what to do. Yeah. And the other problem is the credit. Like, I don't know enough about Bitcoin or any of these alternative systems to understand if they even address like credit. And how do you get credit to start something, to finance?
I mean, there are things that you can do with decentralized finance, and there are alternatives. I mean, and one alternative, and this is something that, I mean, to your point about how we don't have free markets here based on venture capital. I mean, if you didn't have the SEC and everything else, then there's an infinite number of different private financing models that could be developed and could be innovated.
Right. Like crowdsourcing.
Like crowdsourcing, but even like there are different models. Like there's a royalty capital model where it's like, okay, well, you're giving somebody some money, but you're taking a percentage of their gross revenue until you hit a certain predefined return. There are all kinds of different creative structures that are not viable because of the SEC and because of tax policy. So right. I mean, so you could have cryptocurrency, you could have DeFi, and then you could have all of these other funding mechanisms that could come about. And but you know, again, this is why I'm for as many network states as we can get, and with experimentation, because when we talk about this, I mean, again, when I'm looking at what's going on with AI, I talk to my kids about this. My kids are 14, and so like there's this big issue. They're twins, and so it's so what should they study? And it's like, okay, well, are you going to study STEM? Like anything. So I show them AIs. I actually just helped my daughter with her. She had to do for biology class, design an experiment to try to help people that are post-stroke to regenerate brain cells and everything else. And you know, I popped into a couple different AIs, and by the time it was done, not only did we design a study, but I actually created an AI song for it, which of course, I drive everybody nuts with these AI songs. But I'm kind of like, so there's this aspect of, well, this is cheating, and it's like, yes, but then in the future, you're not going to be like doing arithmetic by hand is not going to help you in the marketplace. You're not going to move forward with that. But then on top of that, we really are moving to an age of abundance, and this is where control over AI becomes interesting and problematic. I mean, if we have AIs that, if we already have something where you can type in a prompt and it'll create a business plan, execute the business plan, create a website, figure out how to start taking money and accepting money, then, you know, the GDP and the productivity of the nation is going to be overwhelming. I mean, we essentially could be in a complete state of abundance. And related to this idea of people changing their thinking, and this, again, this is why I'm really hesitant to want to push solutions on any. I don't want to push solutions on anybody, and certainly not overall solutions. But to me, our personalities, at least in America, are so tied up with, and our identity is so tied up with how we make a living, that like the idea of, well, what if you actually didn't have to worry about your basic needs? Then people are like, well, then I would have no purpose. But
Right.
I actually think that there's an aspect of through externalization of media school and everything else, like we don't really pursue with curiosity the fundamental questions of who we are and why we're here. I mean, that some of the big fundamental questions about the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness, we don't even look at, because we've penciled ourselves into my identity is tied to being a cog in an economic wheel, that we don't even pursue these other questions. Well, we're at a point where we could actually start pursuing those questions, because there's so much productivity and so much of an increase in abundance that is facilitated by this technology.
But we're not in control of it. So we're still dependent on an employer. Vast majority of people are still dependent on an employer. And they're threatened by that. They're threatened, and their thinking has to become more narrow than questioning what's the purpose of life and what's my potential. My potential is to get up tomorrow morning and go to fucking work.
And this is where the problem becomes. This is why people start talking about UBI. I mean, in Alaska, people get $1,000 to $2,000 per year, which isn't a lot, but it's based on the distribution of dividends from the oil.
Oil, sure.
And so there is. This is why UBI is a fascinating topic, because I dislike UBI because it would be distributed by the government, and that's like that would be the basis for a control system tied into everything else. But when you actually look at the history of UBI, Thomas Paine was actually the first one to kind of suggest the idea, and Milton Friedman really kind of ran with it as well. His idea was that you would have a negative income tax. So in essence, that, you know, if somebody wasn't making any money, they would actually have a negative income tax rate, and they would actually receive money from the system. The problem with UBI is that we have these technocracies that are tied to all these social credit systems. And to me, actually the biggest tension point that we have, and it's the problem that I have with Elon Musk. Elon Musk, I like that he's first principles thinking. I actually do like that, but his first principles are physics, which means that his entire belief system is based on materialism and Newtonian physics. Well, if that's actually your first principles belief system, then technocracy is actually the logical conclusion that you would come to. But let's say, for instance, consciousness is actually primary. Let's say it's not about materialism, then you have a completely different outcome. And the problem is that different outcome can't coexist alongside technocracy. So when I start talking about foundational principles, I actually think the foundational principles of the United States going into the Constitution were based on Newtonian physics and based on scarcity, and that may not be where we're headed soon. And I have no idea how to answer any of the questions that I just posed, but we are going to have to deal with those questions. But I do remember being completely horrified watching an interview with Sam Altman from OpenAI from like a year ago, where he was talking about the fact that they actually have an AI that's been running for a while on solving these particular problems. So they have a long running like project going on within OpenAI to figure out how to solve UBI and all of these other issues, which, based on the bias of OpenAI, that bothers me, because I don't think we would be happy with that outcome.
Well, I think the foundational principle is once you're born, you have a right to be here, right? I mean, that's about as basic as you can get. Once you're born and you're alive and you're a human being, you have a right to be here, just as much right to be here as anyone else. Now, if the rules of the game in this monopoly called life is that you need money to survive, and you have a right to survive, then you have a right to money, period. You shouldn't have to work for someone else to get it. You have a right for it. And that's where a UBI comes in very strong and can defend that principle. And from that point, you still have to provide the incentive, the capitalist incentive, for people to be rewarded for their contributions to society, productive contributions, not illegal stuff now and destructive stuff, but producing things for the benefit of others should be rewarded. On top of that, you have a right to be here. And I think UBI is an excellent idea as well, to set a bar so that, there's a whole range of people, and we don't need a whole lot of people now with AI and robots and all this technocracy. They're talking about, what are we going to do with all these people? How do we keep them alive? Should we keep them alive? Do they even have a right to be here? Like this is insane talk, but this is what the discussion has turned around to.
Yep, it has. So there, so there are fundamental questions and debates that go even around materialism versus not and everything else. But we're not having those debates. Nobody's having those debates.
No.
And to me, this is why I wanted to do this first principles thing, because I think the conversation that we're having right now, like, and kind of some of the series of topics, this needs to be a broad-based, open discussion that people are having.
Exactly.
Right? And nobody wants. I mean, I guess you're here, so we've got a couple of us, but like literally, I've been struggling to have this conversation, and I drive people nuts with it. But
well, people don't know that this conversation could even exist until they hear it, and then they will get interested in it and they'll think about it. But apart from that, it's got to be. They've got to be exposed to it. So we need we need some kind of show that isn't a crime drama or, soapbox talk or star celebrity worship, something that is first principles. Maybe that's the name of the show. Why don't you start a show, First Principles, and get on TV?
Well, I don't think that would get on TV, but we could do it here. I mean, we've got 5,500 people now. I mean, it's not, because again, I actually don't think it's going to be mainstream. I harp on the fact that there's a quote. I don't know if you've heard me. I've got to find it. Let me pull it up. But I've found it to be true from my, from my life experience in business, but in politics and in every discipline. Let me see if I can pop this up. So the quote is basically, when an audience is presented with a theory that is one level above their understanding, they find it inspiring. When the information is 2 levels above their comprehension, they fall asleep. At 3 levels, they become angry. And when the data reaches 4 levels above the level of the audience, they want to kill the presenter.
Wow. Who said that?
This was a guy by the name of Dr. Charles Tart. He's if you're familiar with him, he's a psychologist. And I believe he was involved with Russell Targ and some people that were involved in some pretty interesting things. But I actually do find that quote to be accurate. And actually, I found that when I ran for president, mainstream media didn't want to cover me anyway. I mean, you mentioned the whole getting access. You could get onto I only wanted to get onto the debate stage to warn people about CBDCs. I wasn't actually serious about running, but they have this process for, you have to get this many donors and you have to get at least a certain percentage in a poll. Well, the problem is I couldn't get anybody to even include me in the poll, even though I'd run for office before in New Hampshire and actually gotten enough votes that would actually meet the threshold. They actually literally wouldn't include me in the poll, so you couldn't be included. But I did do so. But I did a lot of podcasts. I did a lot of niche podcasts and everything else. But I remember I did a mainstream radio show, not a big radio show, and I started talking about some of these ideas. I started talking about meditation. I started talking about a whole variety of things, and literally, I mean, it was just slammed with criticism. People literally didn't even want to entertain it at all. And I think that there's a lot to this. So again, I think it's okay to build momentum, and I'm okay with building momentum, but I'm even having a hard time building momentum on this idea within communities that I would think would be interested in it. And that's a challenge. But I may do maybe I'll do a first principles segment for this show, or do an offshoot of it. Because some people are interested in it. But I mean, I think about Patrick Byrne and his blockchain tech stack for human civilization, and he just got crushed. He got shoved out of his own company, and then they shut down and basically destroyed all of the valuable stuff that he was working on, which I think was actually intentional. And then he went off, and then he spent all of his time fighting this, election integrity issues and everything else. And so in my opinion, he was working on stuff that was interesting, this solution, which is blockchain tech stack. And then he ended up focusing on all of this like surface level stuff related to elections, which is a shame because he was actually building something that could be an alternative. He even called it a hot swappable blockchain tech stack for human civilization. So in other words, his view was, well, let's try to save America, but if we don't save America, here's the plan B. And then the plan B he abandoned, and then now, and so everybody that I know is distracted on this. Everybody thinks RFK is going to fix things and Elon's going to fix things, and we're losing because I think we could get Agenda 2030 by 2028 at the rate we're going.
Yeah. How do you access AI to ask it questions and get it to do these assignments, assign it tasks? I mean, I can't. All I know is go on Google and type something in, and then hit the Ask AI, and it comes back, and you can chat with it all night. I've done it, but how do you get it to actually begin, like you were talking, doing work for you, building a website?
So this is a new thing. It's called what is it, Manus or whatever. I don't have access to it yet. It's invitation only. I signed up for it, but I've watched some YouTube videos about it. I guess it's the whole theme in AI for this year is it's the year of agents. It's going to be the year where AI goes from helping assist you figuring out how to do things to actually doing things. And there was an example of this, which I think the example was fake, but I heard the OpenAI CEO talk about an example of, imagine, you're going to do an event in a city, or even something like you're going to go to dinner and you have all these dietary restrictions. Well, I mean, if you're going to call 300 restaurants would be impossible. But in the future, you're going to have your own AI agent, where you're going to say, hey, this is my specification. And essentially, when your AI agent is calling all of these people, everybody else will be using AIs. So you're going to actually have a situation where in 10 minutes, 300 AI agents are going to be able to talk to each other, and you're going to get back kind of a compiled answer to whatever it is that meets your needs and requirements. This was one of the examples that was talked about that, like, this year is something that could be there. But this Manus thing kind of came out of left field.
How do you spell that?
Let me pull this up again. I think it's MANUS.
MANUS.
Yeah.
.com.
It's Chinese. So let me see if that's what the URL is. Manus.im, actually. MANUS.im.
IM. Okay, cool. Thanks. I'll check it out. See, we could ask that we could ask AI to tell us how to, or actually to do it for us, change government and wake up the people.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, the waking up is an inside job, but it's one of the things that I actually showed this. I'll show it again. There's like a group mind movie. I got into doing meditation and then realizing we're all programmable beings.
Sure.
And we're mostly, like, from the time we're 0 to 7, whatever comes in, we don't consciously filter it. And so these become part of our subconscious beliefs. And then we go through all these layers of indoctrination. But it is possible to reprogram your subconscious. And the way to do that is to get into the brainwave state that you are at from 0 to 7, which is essentially an alpha brainwave state. And there are ways to do that through meditation. There are ways you can use binaural beats where you have one frequency in one ear and one slightly off in the other ear. So you basically entrain to the difference between the two. And if you set that for alpha or theta or whatever, then you can pick, so you can program yourself, right? So it's TV programming. So instead of the idea of I'm going to watch what Hollywood says, or I'm going to watch what the CIA says. I'm going to program my own movie. So instead of watching big pharma ads that scare me into thinking that my toenails are going to fall off, I'm going to create here's a vision for what I want. So you put yourself in that meditative state, and then you watch your own movie, basically program yourself. And I spent some time, so this was all pre-COVID, and having been involved with the Liberty community here, and I've seen other Liberty communities, I've noticed, I'm not saying that this is where they went, but then even studying some of these movements, the self-improvement movements, or even some of like Osho and everything else, it's like everything turns into a sex cult. Or you look at some of these other organizations, and so I'm like, how do you not have that happen? What if you had a group mind movie, and where so we came up with these kind of like affirmations for what a group, just like a peaceful, voluntary community that is caring and self-feedback. Like we had this whole thing put together, this whole movie, and that was actually what I was doing pre-COVID, and didn't get anywhere with it. I talked to a couple people, and tried to get into the self-improvement part of it. And the self-improvement part of it always has, as part of it, kind of realizing that you have these subconscious beliefs and then tapping into that and reprogramming it. It's just that it tends to be that the groups that are offering the ability to help you reprogram yourself have a tendency to try to program you on their own behalf.
Yeah.
And so how do you not do that? So that was part of, and by the way, I still don't have an answer, but that was an area that I was kind of looking at. But then in doing a lot of these things, I've found that most people do come to these revelations or go through this process because they had some crisis, and myself included.
Right.
So when we talk about waking the people up, on the one hand, I'd like to say, hey, well, how do we wake everybody up? But then I can't say that even from my own experience and other people that I know that have woken up, they didn't do it without going through hell first. And do you have to go through hell first? Is there a way to do it? Is there a way to wake people up without having to, hit some really negative?
Yeah, the thing I've found that works the best is to not preach and not present like and you have a solution that you're a genius and everybody else needs to hear it. The way to approach people is to have a discussion with them and respect that their point of view is equally valid as yours, but to ask enough questions that, like, every time you ask a question, it challenges the person to think a little bit deeper of how to answer and put into words what they believe. And if you use that tool and craft it in a way that guides them through your questions to question their own beliefs so that they can answer your question, you can eventually get to a place where they might see a crack in logic and start to, then they'll go from there on their own. But if you alienate them right off the bat by trying to preach to them and tell them you know what best, and it gets into a controversy, you've lost them. You lost them in the first 15 seconds probably. But questioning their beliefs, so digging deeper and deeper so that they have to dig deeper into their own beliefs to find the answer to communicate to you, then it might trigger a revelation. That's all I've found.
And that's where I got to that Charles Tart quote, where I'm like, okay, so based on that, I've only got so much time trying to find people that are 3 or 4 levels of awareness away, and trying to that's not where you're going to have a lot of success. Finding people that are kind of 1 layer or maybe 2 layers away. That's why I don't even try to, I don't even want to go mainstream. In fact, the last thing I would want to ever do is be on Fox News or be on MSNBC.
Right.
Because the net effect of it wouldn't wake people up. It would be outrage, and it would turn into some manufactured thing. Which is kind of part of the process. So I'm okay with that, but it is kind of working, working at trying to find people that are ready for it. This is why I say I think COVID woke people up, but not enough. And a lot of the people that are now, I'll call mainstream alternative media, they all have this characteristic of they just woke up yesterday, and so now all of a sudden they did the wrong thing 90 days ago, but they just woke up, and so now they're the front end of telling everybody else what their big revelation is. And the problem with that is that they're still 5 steps behind.
Right.
And where this plays into technocracy is, if your view is, this is one of the things that was frustrating to me, is a lot of people that thought Fauci was, now that Fauci's not there, we don't have any issues. And like it was a bad apple. And like that doesn't even address, like in the org chart, like Fauci's 4 layers down.
Yeah.
And so trying to unravel that, but then and then I'm kind of like, whatever. I'm not looking. I don't know what the solution is for everybody, and even the things that we've talked about. There's so many. So I've had intellectual exercises with myself around these founding principles, and it's like, okay, well, let's throw AI at this. How much of, like, I actually think part of what was wrong with the U.S. is that it was. I came to this, and I don't necessarily know if this is right, because I came to it intuitively, but to me, like the battles of free will versus determinism, love versus fear, abundance versus scarcity, and decentralization versus centralization. And that may not be fully right. And then I went back and looked at, well, how did I come to this? Because just at some point I'm like, well, these are the big things. And I'm not sure if that's entirely right. But I actually, nevertheless, I went through the exercise of applying that and looking at the founding principles. And I think there's a lot of the founding principles of America were actually based on fear and based largely on scarcity, particularly the justice system that we have here. And so this is why when we go back to, if we were having these first principle debates, it would be all over the map, and there are all these abstract concepts. I have no idea where it would lead, and I don't know if I'm right on I don't.
It could also trigger a lot of infighting by the people that are participating, so that it breaks down into nothing but a waste of time. If you have too many different points of view in the same room, you've got chaos.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is absolutely true. And then in the liberty community, if there are 100 people, then there are 150 different opinions. And so
I got a theory on reality. This is kind of based on Newton, whose theory of relativity, or not Newton, Einstein's theory of relativity. So in our life, from the moment I was born, actually before I was born, from the moment I was conceived inside my mother to where I am now, there's probably been several trillion factors, incidents, things that have affected me in my development and in both physical and cognitive, to get me to what I believe I know and who I am today. So if there's no possible way that anybody on earth, 2 people on earth, have had the same trajectory. So if we're all on independent trajectories, we may have shared a lot of the same circumstances, but we haven't had the same teaching sequence since we were born, right? So there's absolutely no possibility that 2 people are going to think the same way or have the same ideas about things. And even our language, what we define as words that when we speak, we think we know what we're saying, may not be what the message that people are receiving when they hear those same words. We chose the words really carefully because our trajectory of knowledge has brought us to choose those words, but we might not even be talking the same language, right?
Yep. No, that's very true.
So the theory of relativity holds. I mean, he proved that it's all from the viewer's perspective, even light and time, it's all relative. So certainly knowledge is, and anyone who believes they have absolute knowledge about anything is just a fool, an idiot, who's so pumped up on their own ego and ideas and hubris. Yep. It's, I don't know, it's marvelous. Marvelous.
Yeah, no, it is marvelous, and there's a lot there to explore with, even with quantum physics and the fact that, do we live in a consensus reality? Is this a simulation? I spent some time doing meditation, looking at the Monroe Institute stuff and I don't have any answer. I've explored a whole bunch of stuff. I have more questions than answers.
Yeah. Well, everything you learn triggers more questions, right? So you get more and more confused the more you learn.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And then I'm kind of like, well, whatever. But I am pretty adamant that technocracy. I think anything that removes free will it seems to me to be a root issue.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's certainly a lot to discuss. Well, we're getting on here. It's been 3 hours and 44 minutes. Dan, do you have any last? He might not even be on. But Dan, do you have any last comments or questions?
No, you guys have been rocking it pretty good. I'm listening to your conversation, and thanks a lot for putting this together tonight, Aaron.
Yep. So thank you for joining, and I thought this was good. We ended up with 5,600 people, which is actually good. I'm grateful for that because this was an important one. So hopefully people got some value out of the information, and we can start getting the word out.
Cool. How do you download the recordings that it says it's doing? Do you know?
Well, so I'll end this stream, and then I'm using a piece of software called StreamYard, and then so it's going to be up on Rumble and YouTube and Spotify and iTunes, and then it'll also be on X. And then if you want to download,
this conversation portion will be too.
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm on StreamYard too. I just wondered if there was a way to download just this portion.
I don't. Yeah.
It says it's up. Oh no! Stay in the studio until your recordings are uploaded. Whatever that is, I don't know. I don't know anything about this program. So yeah, I'll just go to Rumble and download the whole thing.
Yep, and then I'll do clips from it too. I'll use an AI thing to generate clips that I'll put out at some point. Although I'm so backlogged on this, but I think there are a lot of really good thoughts and exchange. I actually like this interactive part. I don't like doing. I struggle doing the presentation part where I can't see who I'm talking to, and there's no interaction. So I have no idea. Like I can put together a whole bunch of information, but it's not helpful for me to put together. If I'm not presenting the information in a way that is intelligible, and I'm not getting any feedback, it's rough for me. So I actually like the interactive part more than any of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's superb. Okay, well, thanks very much for all you do again, and
thank you.
Look forward to talking some more.
All right, thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.